Techstrong TV. Today is Monday, September 12th, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world. So stay tuned. As always, we're going to start off with our Techstrong News Recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we're going to head over to Allen, where he will sit down with Stacey Hayes, co-founder and executive vice president of North America at Assured Data Protection, where the two will talk about how the industry needs to be open about dealing with aftermath, including how to get businesses running just hours after breaches and attacks, and how immutable backup and DR mitigates downtime and loss. Then we go over to Open Source Summit, where Allen sat down with Stephen Hendricks, vice president of research at the Linux Foundation, and Matt Jarvis, director of developer relations at Sneak, to talk about a survey that recently revealed covering an open source space, specifically secure software development. Then, Mitch sits down with Anush Kapoor, president and CEO at CloudBees, and Sasha Labore, chief strategy officer and co-founder at CloudBees, to discuss lessons from the transformations in cybersecurity industry and to inform where they might go next in DevOps and digital transformation. They also discuss how they are engaging with customers and partners during the upcoming DevOps World 2022 conference in Orlando, Florida, September 27th through September 29th. Then we are airing episode 5 of the SRE show. In this episode, hosts Mitch Ashley and Austin Parker are joined by Anna Margarita Medina of Lightstep, Andy Grabner of Dynatrace, Jessica Kerr of Honeycomb.io, and Michael Keogh of Confluent to discuss the relationship between observability and SRE, how observability can help SREs build more reliable applications, and how combining chaos engineering and observability allows engineers to expose unknown issues that impact how their systems respond to failure. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars we have in store for you. And then we're going to air episode 1 of our new series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. We then go back to Mitch, where he interviews Randy Watkins, Critical Start CTO, to learn more about cybersecurity during mergers and acquisitions. And finally, we're going to finish out this broadcast with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first, Mike interviews OutSystems CTO Patrick Jean, where Patrick will explain why today there is so much more focus on developer productivity. In the second episode, Mike interviews SoFi CEO Saeed Hamid, where Saeed will explain how $7.75 million in additional funding will be used to advanced application testing using a no-code platform. And that's what we have coming for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. Without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for September 12th. First up, the U.S. has barred tech companies that receive federal funding from building advanced technology facilities in China for the next 10 years. This comes as more business groups have pushed for government support to reduce reliance on China. The goal is to set up restrictions so recipients of CHIPS funds for semiconductors cannot use the money to invest in China. The U.S. produces only 10% of the global supply of semiconductors, down from around 40% in the early 90s. With this new restriction, though, the U.S. hopes to build back up its own semiconductor industry. Next, Ireland's data privacy regulator has decided to fine Instagram $400 million after investigating its handling of children's data. The investigation, which started back in 2020, found child users from 13 to 17 were allowed to operate business accounts, which facilitated the publications of their phone numbers as well as email addresses. The Data Protection Commission regulates these tech giants and has opened several investigations into Meta already, with this being the latest. Last year, they fined WhatsApp $225 million for failure to conform with EU data rules. Meta has stated that Instagram plans to appeal against the fine, so we'll see what happens there. Next, Apple CEO Tim Cook has stated it has no plans to adopt Rich Communication Services, or RCS. RCS is a major improvement over SMS messaging that allows you to send high-quality videos and photos, as well as provide features such as typing indicators and delivery and read receipts on messages. Google reports now over 500 million people use RCS messaging, and it has been pressuring Apple to adopt RCS so Androids can better send multimedia files instead of allowing only SMS between non-Apple products. However, Tim Cook recently stated at the Code 2022 conference that Apple customers weren't demanding for this support, and there are no plans to adopt RCS at any time in the future. In other news, Uber Eats has signed a 10-year deal with Nuro, an autonomous driving startup for autonomous food delivery. Starting in the fall, they plan to deploy the autonomous delivery vehicles in California and Texas. Neither company has stated the number of vehicles or customers that will participate in these early tests, though. This deal has been in the works for nearly 4 years now, as Uber originally approached Nuro to make deliveries in Houston back in 2019. This deal highlights Uber's push into the move towards autonomous delivery, as Uber is also working with Serve Robotics and Motional to test deliveries. Next, Mercedes-Benz and Rivian have formed a new joint venture to build commercial electric vans. They plan on creating 2 models using both Mercedes-Benz and Rivian's electric van platforms. The companies stated that they plan on investing in a plant, with the target set on using an existing Mercedes-Benz site in Central or Eastern Europe. This will be Rivian's first manufacturing plant outside of the US, with the ultimate goal of spreading electric vehicles to new areas and new markets. Rivian currently has a contract to build 100,000 electric vans for Amazon, which they expect to be fully on the road by 2030. However, this deal isn't exclusive, though, and allows Rivian to sell electric vans to other companies, which it plans to start doing next year. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at how to get human-centric ethics and AI right. While AI can be incredible at driving business success, it can come at significant ethical costs. If proper steps aren't taken now, AI won't be able to deliver on its promise. To learn more about some of these pressing issues, go to digitalcxo.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at a survey that suggests mixed progress on developing ransomware defense. Over 400 technology, financial, and security leaders took a survey by HYCU, a provider of data protection. Some of the findings include that 54% felt that they were mostly prepared for a ransomware attack, but only 45% stated that their recovery from a ransomware attack would be easy. To learn more about the findings and their implications, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an article looking at how Google is extending its file storage enterprise for accessing NFS-based storage to be accessible by Google Kubernetes Engine. With this new feature alongside backup for GKE, it enables enterprises to bring their workloads into GKE. Google has also added other features such as Cloud Storage Autoclass tool that will move objects to lower-cost Google storage services. To learn more about Google's new services for GKE, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I am happy to have a new person, a first-time person. He's not a new person, but he's a first-time person here on Techstrong TV. His name is Stacy Hayes. He's co-founder over at Assured Data Protection. Many of you, if you've heard of Assured Data Protection, may know them as Assured, but the real name is Assured Data Protection. Hey, Stacy, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me. Really quite an honor to be on Techstrong TV. So thanks.
I don't know if it's an honor, but thank you. Stacy, I always like to, kind of lay a foundation of giving people an idea of who you are and a little bit about your company.
Absolutely, Alan. And like you said, there's a lot of company names out there in the world, and a lot of people may not recognize our name, but they may recognize the name of one of our key partners, which is a company called Rubrik out of Palo Alto.
Sure.
And I'm sure you've heard of Rubrik before, right? Right.
Yep.
So we're their MSP number one. We've literally been working with Rubrik since 2015. So 7 years, and really have been with them since the very beginning. I mean, they're 10 years old, so we got a very deep level of experience with them. Great little side story. They found us. They were looking for their pathway to market is 100% indirect. So they sell through the value add reseller channel. And they were looking to begin an MSP offering, and they were looking for an anchor partner. And the traditional VARs, the models don't work that way. A VAR model is episodic. It's transactional based. MSP is build it so that they will come. This is my second company. It's my business partner's second company in the data protection space. I started my first company back in 2000. We were acquired in a roundabout way in 2010 by Verizon. And Simon, my business partner, kind of the same story. His company was acquired in 2013. We were friends. We were looking for something to do. Quite frankly, we didn't want to do data protection. It's not the most exotic thing in the world. We kind of hope we could be sports agents or
you and me both.
Yeah, right. But I think at some point, you kind of come to the realization that you need to do what you know. And obviously, we know the space very well. Rubrik literally approached us through a distributor in the United Kingdom, and we got our people right. Simon had exited the business, was doing other things. I'd stayed in technology, and was coming up on an inflection point with another startup that I was at that had been acquired by EMC, and then EMC was being acquired by Dell. So the timing is right for us to do something. We got introduced to Rubrik. We pulled our engineering people and we said, look at this. And they were like, oh, wow. And two big things. One, we knew right away that it was going to disrupt a very static and industry segment and needed disruption, the data protection space. But two, we really saw the foundations for that second act that you've got to have in the Valley. If you got a good idea and you do VC, around that time where you start to plateau, you've got to start monetizing that investment. And if you don't have something to springboard that second product, and in Rubrik's instance, it was really these tools that are now being brought to bear. The foresight here was uncanny because you've got an immutable level of protection. And this is, a lot of immutable the world would like to tell us that immutability is an overused word. It is if you're faking it. With Rubrik, you're not. They've got a 100% track record of never being compromised, from a ransomware attack. So it's true immutability. But then the tools that we layer on top of this platform to help customers sense via looking at the protected data, is there a bad actor? Determine what the blast radius is if the actor strikes, and then automate the recovery of the data afterwards. It was those tools that we saw 7 years ago, really before this scourge of ransomware stroke malware is upon us, that really made us quit our day jobs and start assured data protection. And so we literally started the company around one OEM. We only do Rubrik. We don't do anything else. I like to tell everyone that's a bet 7 years later that I'm still glad I made. And it's been very successful.
Absolutely. And you're right, Stacy. Data protection, disaster recovery, it's not the sexiest thing on earth. We'd all like to be sportscasters or movie stars or something else. But you know what? It never goes out of style either. Not only does it never go out of style, almost cyclically or periodically, new threats emerge, new vectors emerge that once again prove, look, if you are a prudent business person, a reasonable business, you've got to be doing something in the data protection DR space. I mean, I live here in South Florida, right? For us, a lot of DR stuff was what happens if a hurricane hit and wiped out your data center, or something else like a natural catastrophe. But you're right. Over the last, 6-7 years, you probably didn't foresee it, but sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. Who would have thought that this ransomware scourge, as you called it, would grow into what it is? I mean, we were talking off camera. Some of these ransomware organizations are so full-featured. They have help desks, they have channels, they have partners. It's amazing. I mean, these are not kiddie scripters anymore.
No, they're not. And that's really where a piece of our value gets called into play, because in addition to being what is a managed services provider? Well, at its core, right, it's operationalizing the tech and delivering it as a managed service. But our infrastructure, our topology, if you will, we established tenancy on premise. And so we're introducing a physical appliance, leveraging this technology, but also operationalized and delivered as a service on-prem. But then we replicate that data into very secure data centers all around the globe. So we have physical footprint in Singapore, in Europe, in the UK, and in the US. And in those replication sites, we deliver not only second site redundancy. So, like you said, in Florida, we call it the smoking hole, right? But for some reason, you've lost power for 2 weeks. Let's not forget that before ransomware, we still needed DR as a service. But our topology, once we got that second copy, is to give customers an automated method of recovery that we define as DR as a service. So in our world, for those customers that opt for that level of service, we have our own proprietary tools that give the customer the ability to launch a recovery, and in an automated fashion on the back end, their VMs and their applications to come up, so VMs coming up in an application-aware format, fully automated with no human intervention. Basically up to the point of human intervention, which is typically when you see the requirement to cut over Active Directory. Because we sit inside of a physical asset, we have the ability to extend connectivity. So a lot of customers will bring in an SD-WAN device, make us a node on their network. Again, lots of automation and pre-planning to support disaster recovery, with this idea that something happens. And like you said, we've been talking about, you mentioned cyclical. What a great word, right? Because we've been talking about DRAS literally all of our professional lives, and we probably always will be. But, the idea is that you're dealing with a problem. And if you think about it, ransomware is not much different than a hurricane, right? It's a problem. You got to deal with it. So the idea is that you declare your disaster. Everything's coming up in an automated format up to the point where it's time for you to do something. But all the work has been done. All the pre-work has been done. It has been captured in automation such that when the real problem occurs, you're there and you're ready to go. Where we see this impacting the ransomware conversation is that, as we talked about off screen, it's one thing to protect the data. That's kind of table stakes. If you got to negotiate with the bad guys to get your data unencrypted, there's not much you can do until you get your data back. But let's assume for a minute that the data is protected. Where are you going to recover it to? If your on-premise infrastructure is still compromised, and now we see, and you mentioned cybersecurity, and you mentioned that now oftentimes a declaration is taken out of the hands of the practitioners and put in the hand of the insurance companies, we see law enforcement engaged. Basically the digital equivalent of yellow tape around the infrastructure. And so your data is protected. Where are you going to recover? And so are you going to be out? Are you going to suffer a business interruption for 72 hours, for a week, for 2 weeks? That is as damaging as losing your data or having your data exfiltrated. And so the ability to invoke what would traditionally be something that you only invoked, in the event of something extreme, a fire, a cable cut, a hurricane, now to invoke that same process in a response to a ransomware attack, bring that environment back up, eliminate downtime. That's really the value of our company and really that MSP space overall.
First of all, thanks for that, Stacy. Let's dig into that a little bit, right? We've looked at the ransomware issue, 7 ways from Sunday, right? We've spoken to cyber insurers. We've spoken to anti-phishing people. We've spoken to, many different people along that ransomware kind of attack surface and defense. What we don't spend a lot of time is, you either paid or didn't pay. They gave you the decrypt code. It doesn't work, or you didn't pay, right? But you paid for an assurance, kind of solution, a DR solution. How do you, real nuts and bolts? How do you recover here? What do you do? What are the steps to get things back online, back on track without, shutting your company down for 2 weeks?
Great question, Alan. And the answer is that declaration, because once you declare and we bring you up, again, the long pole in this tent isn't the recovery of VMs. Companies like Rubrik have made that stick simple. The challenge is the network. It's how do your users find their applications when they're not where they were supposed to be? And that's where that pre-work, and you can't discount the pre-work. The automation doesn't work if the pre-work's not done. And so in our world, when you sign up, it's important to note that when you sign up as a DR, as a service customer, we give you 2 drills per year for free. For a period of up to 6 days, we forgive the consumption cost of resources. So you think about, what is the expense of cloud? And we're obviously, we are the cloud provider, for our OEM. We suspend the cost of those resources for a period of up to 6 days, bring your environment up and give it to you in a bubble so we don't have to re-IP. And the reason for that is so that you can log in and you can do UAT, you can do performance testing, you can move things around, you can get a feel for what it means to be operating in a remote site for a period of time. We do that twice a year. At the end of those drills, we produce 2 documents. One's a simple certificate. It's designed to be handed to a third party. Many of our customers have to document that but they have executed successful DR drills back to their insurance companies, back to their third-party auditors, also up to the board of directors. The second report, much more detailed and in-depth because it documents all the changes that need to be made to the automation. Because as you and I know, IT is not static. It's dynamic. It changes all the time. And so I used to be in the Navy. I used to run the damage control training team. And, in the Navy, you run a drill every day. 365 days a year, you run a drill. And I can't tell you how many times as a young officer on the Navy ship, the kids would come up to me. It was Christmas Eve. And they're like, and I was the dispersing officer. And so they called me Disbo. And they're like, Disbo, tell me we don't have to run a drill today. And I was like, yep, we run a drill every day. And the reason you run a drill every day is because when the surface under your feet is on fire or sinking, you don't want to have to think. You want to be able to act. It needs to be muscle reaction. And that's what the DR drill process is about. So once you've got that really wired up, the thing happens you come up, and then, like you said, I want to answer your question. So now you've been over here in your second site for 72 hours, for a week or two. You've got new data. But the great thing about the technology is that what used to be replica has now become primary. And so we're backing that data up and we're capturing all those changes. When it comes time to come home, and sometimes you come home, sometimes you don't come home. We've got a great instance of a company, and again, to deviate from the ransomware story, they were struck by a riot in 2000, and it penetrated their data center. It was in the back of a retail outlet. They operated in our environment for 90 days, for 3 months. And when they failed back, they said, we're not going back there. We're going back to a combination of secured colo and public cloud, Azure. So there's always the coming home bit that then has to be sorted. But again, this is where the magic of the technology continues to have a massive effect. Rubric replication is incrementals forever. It's astonishing. So the replica became primary for a temporary period of time. Coming home was figured out, whether that was back where you used to be or whether it was somewhere else. Replication is reversed with our staff acting as an extension to your IT department, such that now the data is back where it needed to be. You're doing it over the weekend in a very controlled format. You cut over with zero downtime. So it's all about, again, the value of an MSP in this environment, where if you were on your own, you'd struggle to do that. But because we do that every day, it makes it that much easier. And it turns into that true intrinsic value of having experts that are part of a service delivery model. You don't need them every day. You hope you never need them. But man, when you do, it's sure good when they're there.
You know what? So that's right there, Stacy. That's gold, right? Because that's the truth, right? It's like insurance, right? Well, beyond that, it's like security. The best example of having great security is not having any incidents that you've got to report, right? You hope to never have to deploy your DR stuff. You never have to stand it up over there. But when you do, you want to know it works quickly, and it's seamless, or as seamless as possible. Let's talk a little bit nuts and bolts. Someone's listening out there and says, this sounds like something reasonable. Look, cyber insurance is going through a crazy time right now. These cyber insurance agencies are becoming very picky, needy, whatever, demanding about what they want their customers to do before they'll insure them, and the rates are not cheap. Someone says, you know what? I'm going to cut to the chase. I want a good DR system here. Rubric sounds great. How do they engage? Do they have to go through Palo? Do they go to you directly? Are you the one source of truth for them? How do we do that?
So, great question about the business model, because in this world, it's all about that trusted relationship. And so, first off, table stakes. How do you find us? Assured dash, not an underscore, but the hyphen DP, deltapapa.com. Mm-hmm. So assured-DP, you find us, you go to Rubric and you say, I need managed service. Rubric's going to come right to us because we're MSP number one. But the important thing, Alan, is how do these customers buy? And that's where, and I told the story earlier about Rubric being 100% indirect. We are massive believers of the channel. And why do you believe in the channel? Is it a route to market? Of course. That's not the value of the channel. The value of the channel is a trusted relationship between an IT supplier and an IT end user. And so we mimic the Rubric selling motion, and we sell 100% through the channel. There are a lot of big name, brand recognizable, value-added resellers where we are their white label provider. They sell our service as theirs. They take first call support. We're a natural escalation for level 2. anything my team, which is available, oh, by the way, 24/7, 100% trained engineers. And so when you're calling, from either a tier 1 or a tier 2 perspective, there is a rubric trained, rubric certified, assured trained, assured certified engineer answering the phone. Anything my team can't handle is by definition something that only rubric can handle. We're fully integrated into ITSM platforms and the ticketing systems, so it's seamless. At no point does the customer get handed off to the OEM and we go, oh, it's not our problem, it's theirs. We own it as a white glove service all the way back down to ticket closure. And the customer is buying that through CDW, SHI, or one of their regional partners, like a C3 Technologies or a Freed. So it's all about that trusted advisor, and that really makes for a good experience versus having to just, I don't know, put a billboard up and try to talk people into the fact that they're going to trust you with their most valuable asset, which is their data. So I think by working through the channel, we have a great leg up where, it's all about people are worried, or how do you make the right choice here? It's difficult. But if you can travel through that relationship that is the channel between the end user and that seller, then you've got a much better experience.
Agreed. Hey, Stacy, we're way over time here. I'm sorry, but I want to thank you for coming on and talking about this, because this is kind of a underreported, talked about aspect of this whole ransomware, wave that we're dealing with. Continued success. Keep up the great work. Come back and keep us posted.
Thank you so much, Alan. I could talk about this all day, but like you said, we got things to do. So I appreciate
We all do. Yep.
All righty. Stacy Hayes, Assured Data Protection. That's Assured-DP. We're going to take a break here. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here live in Austin, streaming out at you from the Open Source Summit. We're having a great time. This is our third day of coverage here, though technically it's only day 2 of the event. It's a long story, but we'll talk about it later. Let me introduce you to our next 2 guests, because this is a conversation I was really looking forward to. To my left here is a gentleman who's been on Techstrong TV a few times with us. We talked in person. Great person. He's the VP of Research for Linux Foundation, Stephen Hendrick. And Stephen, welcome.
Thanks, Alan.
And joining Stephen and I from our friends at Sneak, Matt Jarvis. And Matt, if I'm not mistaken, you're head of
Director of Developer Relations.
Director of Developer Relations. Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Stephen and Matt presented, was it yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday, yeah.
On a new survey that you guys recently announced and revealed and report. Why don't you, if you don't mind, share with our audience?
Sure, I'd love to. So, OpenSSF is a very big project inside the Linux Foundation.
We've seen.
Brian Bellendorf, yeah.
Yep.
And so, at his request, we went out and did a survey into sort of what's happening in the open source space as far as secure software development. So we put together a survey in March. We fielded it in April. We wrote it up, analyzed it, wrote it up in May, and had it produced in June. And so it's being released here at the event. I think that happened yesterday morning.
Yeah.
I believe it did. We did it in partnership with Sneak.
Great.
So that's why we've been working together with the messaging on all this. And it was not a surprise from the standpoint of what the results were, but it wasn't. I was a little disappointed in kind of where we are at this point, from the standpoint of the uptake of the attention to security when it comes to open source. So anyway, we've got information that talk a little bit about where we are, how sort of to understand the context of the problem, and then we have information about what people are doing about it. And that's more exciting in many respects because good things are happening.
I agree. So first of all, look, I think we're always disappointed when we do these surveys and we find out, you know, beyond the lip service that gets paid to security, what actually is going on under the covers. And we're always wishing for and hoping for more.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't want to be pessimistic. I am of the glass half full opinion that we are doing better and more security now than we probably ever have done.
Yeah, I agree.
That being said, before we dive into it, I just want to really just quickly. So OpenSSF is openssf.org is, I believe, the website.
Yeah.
And I'm going to assume that the report is there for anyone who wants to download it.
That's right.
So let's say that up front for people at home following along.
Yep.
Whether it's live or
Well,
you're watching this
It's on the
recorded.
Sneak site. It's
So it's
on
on the Sneak
Linux
site.
Foundation site, and it's on OpenSSF.
Yeah, there's a whole
If I'm not
It's
mistaken,
everywhere.
Find it.
I think we might have covered it via Sneak over on Security Boulevard.
I think I did some press interviews on
Probably
it
with-
before flying out here. So
Yeah.
we may have
So
discussed
it may very
yeah.
well be on our Security Boulevard site.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's out there for people.
Yeah.
Let's dive in now, though. What was some of the findings, Stephen?
Sure. Well, let's see. What we'll start with is this whole issue of, do organizations have an open source security policy? And what we found was 49% said they had one.
That's good.
That's good. 34% did not, and 17%
Said we don't use
said-
open source.
No, just
I'm only kidding.
no. Everybody uses open. Well, 98% of
I know.
organizations use it. So, and 17% said they don't know. So
They
we
don't
obviously-
even know.
They don't know if they have one or not. So if you put aside the don't knows at this point, you got about a 60-40 split between don't have a policy and don't have a policy. I mean, and if you look at a little more deeply into that, what you find is that small companies are more likely to not have a policy. And that's not surprising. They are resource constrained. So it's harder for them to have CISOs and OSPOs and policies, be it for either just software development or open source software development. So I can understand the challenges there. But the idea of even if you look at company size, we still ended up with about 30% of large and very large organizations that don't have a policy for open source software development.
So a couple of thoughts. First of all, I empathize with small SMB businesses. We're an SMB business. But in today's day and age, and maybe it's when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But in today's day and age, how do you not have security policies? How do you not have,
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of different things at play there. I mean, addressing open source security, is more complex than it
Yes.
seems, because it's not just about the code itself. You've kind of got to understand how open source is created, how projects are governed, because governance can have a big play into, whether if you look at some of those recent things around the sort of protestware movement, where we've seen maintainers kind of going rogue, and this comes down to single maintainer governance projects, and you need to take those things like governance into account if you're going to base your business on something, right?
So, but you just said,
and that's a complex,
a loaded question. I would bet, if I was a betting man, right, that at the large enterprise level, you're 100% correct. At the SMB level, if you ask most of these people a threshold question of where is your open source software? It's 10 o'clock. Where's your open source software? A lot of them don't know because they're SaaS ops companies, right? They don't have a server closet. Their cloud installation, they're running on SaaS.
That's right.
And so the beautiful part about SaaS is, well, one of the nice things about SaaS is you don't know what's behind the curtain. You just know you log in on the website and it's got all your information there that you need. Are they using an open source database? Are they using, what are they using behind the curtain? a lot of smaller companies don't know, and as part of their due diligence, they don't dig that deep. So I can empathize.
Right.
The larger ones, the larger enterprises, though, that's a problem.
That is.
But I think, you in a lot of those larger enterprises, you've got that kind of ingrained culture over a long time in terms of security and about how you consume software. And the hardest problem in security isn't really about technology at all, right? It's always about people and culture. And I think probably in a lot of larger organizations, you've got a kind of that sort of friction of, well, we've always done it like that.
Well, you also have a lot of change going on from the standpoint of how software is being developed.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that's part of the problem as well, which is that change is always hard for people.
Yeah.
And especially given the rapid evolution of tools and standards, in essence, around how we should do security for software.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Everything's changing so quickly. I think it's probably hard for people to keep up.
Because we've got these two kind of things happening, almost a perfect storm at the same time. We've got this massive rise in supply chain attacks on open source because, it's a victim of its own success, right?
That's right.
And attackers have realized it's a lot easier to get into the supply chain than it is to find 0 days in end user applications. So you've got that going on where all of a sudden folks are going, well, everything we do is based on open source. Like, what do I do about security? And then, as Steve pointed out, you've got this ongoing massive transformation of how we develop software.
Right.
This super fast, high velocity.
I blame DevOps.
Well,
DevOps.
but I mean, unless you can transform, someone's going to eat your lunch, right? Because there's some hungry competitor behind you who's disruptive and who does have a super fast software delivery pipeline. They can deliver new features. They know how to analyze the data.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of big organizations, they've got these two big problems happening right at the same time because that change in software development requires a completely different approach to security. The space that it's the thing that Sneak talk about all the time, about developer first.
Yeah. I mean, you look at, let's say, the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, right? And that's based on a book called The Goal.
Yeah.
Right? And the thing so The Goal was about manufacturing, but really the principle behind The Goal, and I think Gene tried to capture that in the Phoenix Project, is that, look, as soon as we kind of erase one bottleneck, we see that next bottleneck right behind it. And don't think that once you get rid of that bottleneck, it's smooth sailing. It's not. We have massively, revolutionarily speeded up the pace of software development. We did it in large part by creating this software factory with pipeline, CI/CD, DevOps kind of things. That the enabler of that was having this massive library of open source
indeed.
That's right.
pieces that we can assemble into
very
apps.
high quality software that's
So, man, we blew through that roadblock at 150 miles an hour. And the wall we hit right after is, wait a second, now that's become a huge security problem, right? So for companies that are developing their own code, this is a major thing.
Right.
Knowing that, though, and still telling me that 30% of the companies don't have a policy around it, scary.
Yeah, it is. Well, we should talk
Go
about what
more.
people are doing about
Go ahead.
trying to deal with this issue.
All right, here's the good news.
Yeah. So we asked a question, which was, okay, so how do you intend to improve on the situation? What are you doing? And we had quite a long list of responses. Top of the list was organizations were looking for more intelligent tools that had a security focus. So we're talking SCA, SAST, DAST, IAC, all the usual suspects, and looking really to those tools to be able to help them improve their security posture. So that was top of the list. That was 59%. And then right behind that at 52% was a strong desire to understand and essentially codify best practices for how to do secure software development. That was really encouraging because we know all about best practices.
Yep.
We know exactly, what they all are. In fact, David Wheeler at LF.
Actually, we had David A. Wheeler,
Yeah, David A. Wheeler. Okay.
We interviewed David yesterday, and I have a follow-up.
My
with him
mistake.
as well, I learned that. Okay, you want to see the marks? I'm kidding. But yes, David is working on that.
So, he and I had lunch yesterday, and we were talking about this because I said, how many best practices do you have? So, counted them all up. He's got like 150, 160. So that's kind of daunting. And he said, like, the last 25 to get to the highest level can take, in some cases, years to master. So this is despite understanding what these best practices are, it's still very challenging to wrap your head around what is necessary to be successful there.
And partly because, as we were just talking about, that culture change is such a big part of how you make that transition from, your kind of old school security as gatekeeper kind of function to this thing where you put it to the developers, because the developers are the ones you fix it at the developer eyeball before it's got anywhere near, production.
Well,
that's the cheapest place to
10x,
fix it,
right? I was going to say 10 to 100x cheaper to do it there.
And I mean, we look at the other interesting thing here that's slightly tangential to this, but it is like how many developers there are in the world, right? And how many we anticipate there being. There's something like, I think the anticipation is something like 30 million developers in the world, and there's only like a tiny proportion of security folk.
So I go by GitHub accounts. Right?
Okay.
There's about 70 plus million GitHub accounts right now. So let's assume it's not one-to-one.
Right.
But I think it's safe to say there's 40 to 45 million developers, probably growing at somewhere in the area of 10% a year.
I would agree.
And security professionals aren't growing at that rate.
So security professionals are growing because we're starting to see, look, when I came up, you didn't have a cybersecurity major in college. We're seeing schools churn out cybersecurity majors. Are they security professionals? I'll leave it to you. But there are people coming out here who want to work in security, but not anywhere near. I mean, you're talking here and here. Here's an interesting thing, though, and I think it's what's turning up the heat on all of this, is that this is getting major focus from the White House, from the federal government. The whole world is saying, hey, this is a problem.
Right.
This is a big problem.
Well,
we got to do something.
I did a report last year, a survey on S-bombs.
Yep.
And I got to tell you, that factors right into this narrative.
Oh, of course.
Because, we did some stats in this survey on dependencies, both direct and transitive, and found really sort of low levels of strong security around, or organizations understanding the security posture of all these different, dependencies and dependencies of dependencies.
Yeah.
Really low numbers there. S-bombs would go so far in helping sort all that out.
Yes.
Because, S-bombs are going to give you knowledge about the metadata. It's going to give you usability, so you know that you're licensed to use this stuff.
Yep.
And it's going to give you trust that not only what you're looking at for metadata is non-falsified, but also understanding quite clearly, what's been fixed, what hasn't been fixed from a vulnerability standpoint.
So I'll tell you, over the last 2 days here, we've done a lot of interviews, but no shortage of people talking about SBOM and SBOM solutions. I think we're going to see, just like everything else in technology, we're going to see sort of a Cambrian explosion of SBOM solutions out there, and then the market will figure out which ones make sense, which ones don't.
Sure.
My fear is that we think SBOMs are a magic bullet for software supply chain security, because we have a tendency of doing that in security.
Ultimately, when I think the real challenge here is going to be the chain of trust part of that, right?
Yes.
Because what's an SBOM at the end of the day? It's a text file with some stuff in
Well,
it.
no, but they're building some some text files in this thing.
Yeah. It's a lot of good metadata. But one more point I want to touch on, though, is that the number 3 issue from the standpoint of doing improvements to your software security posture was more automation. So IAC tools ended up ranking very highly from a standpoint of helping you address that particular need.
And just for our audience, IAC?
Infrastructure as code.
Right. Okay.
So that that one actually surprised me because this whole idea of developers and manual activities, not only that is a great way to invite in problems, and so more automation ultimately is better.
We did some work last year as part of our Cloud Native Application Security Report, and what was really interesting there was, we kind of use high levels of development automation, i.e. automated CI/CD pipelines and all that stuff as a proxy for how far along your cloud native journey you are, right? I think it's a pretty reasonable proxy to take. And in organizations with those high levels of deployment automation, for a start, we see much higher levels of adoption of security tooling because automation gives you lots of places where you can hook in other automation. But most importantly, we see a massive reduction in the time to fix of vulnerabilities.
Right.
Because through a direct correlation to...
Look, I've been in security a long time. We had a vulnerability solution in a company I founded back in 2005. Back then, there was a company called Hercules. Citadel was the company. Hercules was the product, right? They were doing, they were pushing automated remediation. There's several companies today that have automated remediation. For whatever reason, up until now, organizations have been hesitant to adopt automated remediation because they're afraid it's going to break something else in a totally automated situation. Now, doing this further left in the development pipeline, if it's broken, supposedly that should come up in testing.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean,
and we could fix
this is again what we see when companies adopt Sneak. Is like the automated remediation part of it in terms of automated fix PRs. Is probably not where people start, but very quickly they go.
Right,
Oh,
I
actually,
think
this
they've got to
is
overcome their hesitancy and say,
Yeah.
look, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it goes back to what I said before, blame DevOps, right? if we are going to automate the CI/CD pipeline, we're going to automate building software, the answer cannot be that we're going to manually do security.
That's right, correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
It doesn't work. It's a disconnect.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an anti-pattern in terms of velocity, right? I mean, velocity is the key differentiator for whether businesses in the cloud era are going to survive.
Absolutely.
Because and if you don't have velocity,
but a lesson
you're
we've
probably
learned
done.
in security, or we should have learned over the last 25 years, is if we are going to drag our heels and dig our heels in and say, no, you know what? The train leaves the station without you.
Yeah.
So either get on board and figure out, yes, we can, and here's how, or get out of the way, right? Lead, follow, get out of the way. Security cannot be the drag on this because velocity is too important.
And where we see folks who've successfully made this transition to developer first, you see this sort of this change in security teams from kind of being gatekeepers to being enablers of the paved road.
I agree.
Right?
I
sort
agree.
of toolsmiths.
That's
and trusted
DevSecOps
advisors.
right there.
Yeah.
You just the gist, the heart of it. That's it. Stephen, anything else?
So what's the answer to this issue of not having a security policy? I mean, is it, do you need to start with a CISO? Do you need to start with an OSPO? Do you need, or at least part-time roles and people in organizations, in those functions if you were small? I mean, is that
I think
I'm not sure what the answer is, but I mean, we need one.
I think when people think about policies, they think, oh, this needs to be like 100-page document of some kind. And it becomes overwhelming. But really, a policy can be a one-liner, right?
Amen.
Right.
Amen.
And I mean, we have this conversation a lot when people start to adopt security scanning, right? They've done no security scanning before, and they scan this software, and they go, oh my God, I've got like 500 vulnerabilities. What do I do? But you've got to just pick a starting point, right? And I mean, usually, a sensible place would be no critical vulnerabilities that have got to fix in production. Well, there's a policy right there, right?
Yep.
And it's 3 lines.
I
and it's better than having
he's
zero.
100% right, Stephen. I've run into this firsthand. people, they hear, oh, we need a security policy. They think I need the employee handbook,
Yeah.
right? That comes from your CEO that's this thick.
Yeah.
You don't. It could be one page of 5 bullet points. Anything that's critical is worthy to stop production. Anything not critical doesn't stop production, but has to get fixed within 30 days. That's a policy.
Right.
And I mean, there's plenty of great templated stuff
There
out
certainly
there in terms of usage of open source. You know, the stuff.
And by the way, I'd love to
group
see the OSSF have a library of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you
And
never
actually-
really need to
actually,
start from a blank sheet of paper.
Right, and actually the good news is once you have policy, then automation can follow
Yeah.
pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
that's the right path. You're right.
Guys, we've got our next guest here in the wings. We could talk about this all day. I'm sure I'd
True.
love to, but it wouldn't be fair to them.
Yeah.
Again, you can get this survey over on the Sneak site, which is snyk.com.
.io.
.io, excuse me, or on the OpenSSF. I think it's
.org.
openssf.org.
Right.
Is the website there. Stephen, good work again.
Hey.
I love your surveys,
Hey,
man.
very good.
Thank
Pleasure
you, Alan.
meeting
Thanks so
you.
much, Alan.
Pleasure.
We are going to take a quick break. We're going to mic up our next guest, and we'll be right back here. We're live in Austin.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
I have the great pleasure of being joined by two members of the leadership team, one fairly new from CloudBees. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to be talking with you today.
Thank you, Mitch. Good to be here.
Great.
Great to be with you, Mitch.
Good to be with you, Sasha. You know, our audience knows you, of course, so well from being a co-founder of CloudBees and all your experience in the industry, and we've talked to you many times before. Why don't you start, and then we'd love to have you introduce yourself, Anush, and just tell us a little bit of your background too, kind of where you're coming from prior to joining CloudBees. So, Sasha, if you want to start.
Yes. So for the lucky who don't know me, I used to say that I was born in open source and I grew up in the cloud. I was one of the early member of the JBoss team, then joined Red Hat, and around 2010 co-founded CloudBees. And so been CEO for 11 years, and now I'm focused on the strategy.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to CloudBees, Anush. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit of your background. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the time. So, prior to CloudBees, I was at SAP and then at Cisco. My roles were similar in both companies. I was running strategy for the company, reporting to the CEO. A few stints in product management in Cisco, most recently in our security business group, where I got to see the evolution of security in the new world that we live in. But most of my time at Cisco in the recent past was actually spent with our applications business, which was under a external brand called AppDynamics. And it was really there that I sort of started to understand the power of applications and the power of software to effectively transforming the Global 2000. The more time I spent with them, the more time I realized that this was a category that fundamentally was at a very important inflection point, both in terms of the changes in technology architecture and then in terms of the expectations of customers. So definitely an area that I stayed close to during my time at Cisco, including developing relationships with the ecosystem. So I'm excited to be here at CloudBees, at a company that has so much heritage and history in the DevOps space. And, the next 4 weeks, I think we'll start to tell the world about sort of the exciting things in store for us over the coming years.
Well, your background is fascinating too, because I've spent some time in the security industry myself, and gone through that whole transition from, boxes and racks, right, to, virtualized software, to now you're a software company. Now you're creating software and apps and building security into the apps itself. So I would imagine your own progression, your journey into the world of really creating software as a business will help. I would think that would bring a lot to the CloudBees audience because other folks are facing that as well too.
Absolutely. I mean, security is something that needs to be thought through very carefully. There's obviously a compliance angle, there's a regulatory angle, there's a risk angle, and then there's a control angle. But none of those angles can supersede the primary motivation of software developers, which is to ship and build at high velocity and do it at a scale that is reflective of the business needs of the organization. So I think it's a balancing act between the level of control you impose and the level of flexibility you create, the level of structure you impose, and the level of, in some ways, independence you encourage. And I think that's a balancing act that a lot of corporations are going through. I think that balance is different depending on what geography you're in, what vertical you're in, what level of regulatory constraints are posed on you as an industry. But it's been a fascinating evolution to see how the security industry itself has evolved over the last 15 years and how prominent it's become as a talking point in the transformation efforts of a lot of organizations. And if you look at over the last 12 months, just in terms of the capital markets, it is a category that has continued to remain resilient in terms of both customer spend and then obviously financial market participants' expectations of future value. I think it's reflective of the importance that's been applied to it. I think companies that are in our space, at least that are publicly traded, despite the valuation reset, continue to demonstrate that their business models are very resilient because the power of software to transform has not gone away. And most companies, as you said, over time will become builders of software as opposed to consumers of software. And so I think we are tied into some, very, very important market shifts in the industry that, despite the environment we find ourselves in, have not receded in importance. And certainly the importance of getting it right for our customers has not changed. So it's more important than ever that we are cognizant of where the market's going and aware of the personas and buying centers we sell into to make sure that we're making their lives easier.
Sasha, I'm curious your thoughts, the timing of bringing someone like Anul in as president and CEO, given where we are in the market, the transformation move to the software environment. Software is part of the strategy, right? It's not just a back office element. And that's what you've been working with customers for years, right? With CloudBees. So talk about the timing of the experience and bringing that to bear with CloudBees and your customer base.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's unique, in my opinion, about the DevOps space is the pace at which it's redefining itself. Every 3 years-ish, you have a number of innovations, either in DevOps itself or in a coding space that redefines the way software delivery should be done or can be largely improved. And so that's great because it forces you to constantly innovate. It forces you to be on your guard, right, and be thoughtful about what you have, where you should go, and so on. And CloudBees, I think, is at this inflection point. We've built an amazing foundation, and we have amazing customers. They're very loyal, and we have a lot more that we're doing with them. But the market is also evolving, right, constantly. And for a lot of those customers, the question is, what's next, and how do I project myself in the next 5 years and 10 years? And so I think we're at that point as a company. We've worked on some pretty amazing things. And so Anuj joining is really the perfect win condition from that standpoint, because he gets to leverage that foundation to boost CloudBees in that next era. So I'm super excited about the timing.
I think many of us that have been around DevOps for a while kind of think about, so what's next? Where oftentimes people look like, well, what's the next thing that's going to replace DevOps? I don't know that we're replacing DevOps. As you mentioned, Sasha, it's that inflection point of where we're going next. I'm curious, your insights into that. Where do you see both CloudBees as a company and also your customers as you're learning more about the CloudBees customers?
And that's absolutely, and that's actually, Mitch, one of the things that we'll talk more about probably in the next 4 weeks, which is we have a major customer event coming up. We obviously weren't able to have that event last year in a physical form And honestly, I'm looking forward to engaging with our customers to understand exactly where they are on their transformation journey. And more importantly, what do they believe as an industry we have gotten right, and as an industry we have to get right? And I think those are two different things, which is there's no debate that as an industry we have created value. But I always go back and look at the security industry as a proxy for DevOps. In the security industry, we went from about 1,000 vendors to 2,000 vendors to 3,000 vendors. And in some ways, if you ask your customers and say, do you feel more secure now than you did perhaps 5 years ago, despite the fact that you are likely spending more and the surface area of attacks continues to be greater, but the surface area of your protection continues to be that much greater as well across network, endpoint, and cloud, I think they would say that, the results are mixed. And I think as an industry, while we have made great strides in terms of meeting our customers where they are, perhaps we have created more technology than we have created outcomes. And it's very important that we're cognizant of the operational readiness and the operational sophistication of our customers and the velocity at which they can truly transform, and meeting them where their IT estate is. And that's one of the things that I think always dawns upon me, having worked in larger companies, which is, the next new thing is fantastic, but the addressability of that to the global 2,000 or the top 20,000 customers that frankly drive a bulk of the IT spend continues to be very, very narrow. Most of the technology decisions they made, they're still living with. And those decisions were made 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and in some cases, even 40 years ago. So the combination of industry structure, the combination of consolidation events, the combination of sort of geographical footprint, and the combination of regulatory requirements just creates a state that is very, very heterogeneous, that the vendors have to perhaps work extra harder to be able to manage and sort of insert, the right pieces of technology, the right products to effectively create the right outcomes. So that's honestly what I'm looking forward to in a very, very compressed setting, to meet our customers, understand what we've done right, understand where the industry needs to go, and how they see our role as being a part of that as a critical partner. As Sasha said, we have created a great foundation. That foundation is underpinned on a level of trust, a level of quality, and a level of resilience that we have built into our products. And I look forward to sort of taking that foundation and understanding what more we can do, and more importantly, where we think the industry is going, and whether they see at least certain level of alignment between where our observations are and their needs are.
And the event you mentioned is DevOps World, right, in Orlando, the 27th through the 29th. So hopefully folks are checking that out. I'm going to be there, so hopefully
I look forward to
both of you and chat some more there. I'm curious.
Is that Florida we're seeing behind you, Mitch?
What's that?
Are you already there?
Well, this is Fort Lauderdale, so just down the road a bit. So we kind of have to go north to get there. So to get to Orlando. But, it's only a couple of weeks away, not too far away, September 27th through 29th. I'm curious. So a couple of things that I also want to follow up on. You talked about companies investing in their technology stack, their infrastructure, their applications, all of that. In large corporations, that is a massive investment. You don't turn that over in a dime, nor do you necessarily want to in all cases. You want to be able to bring that forward as well as do transformation and think about new ways of doing things at the same time. How do you do that with CloudBees? I started my journey in DevOps with Jenkins, so I know you all well. But how do you bring the strength of Jenkins and CloudBees and the things that Sasha and team have done to this point, and continue those things, what we've got right, to build on for the future? Thoughts about that? Either one of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll kick it off. Just I'll give you my sort of 4-week perspective, and obviously, Sasha can give you the broader historical archival perspective. So Jenkins continues to be very, very relevant in the market. And I think there's some talk that perhaps it's less so now than it once was. And I think that's true with every technology, right? There's more alternatives at play, but that does not recede nor ignore nor remove the relevance of what Jenkins is as the fundamental market leader from a build perspective. I continue to be amazed at companies large and small that I end up meeting that say, CloudBees, oh, you guys are the enterprise Jenkins. I said, yes, we're more than that, but yes, we are the company most closely associated with Jenkins. And these are individuals that are effectively developing embedded software for next generation VR devices, companies that are basically investing in next generation autonomous driving technology. So this is not just for your classic 3-tier application that needs to be modernized to be, customer facing, employee facing, or supplier facing. There's a lot of that. But CI/CD shows up in many environments, and Jenkins sort of underpins many of those development platforms. I think the critical thing for us is to actually see that over the last 10 years, the market has broadened, and so has the relevancy of a company like ours to be able to actually solve problem statements that are Jenkins-centric, but maybe beyond Jenkins. And that's something that I think we want to be able to be cognizant of, which is, it's similar to, I would say, the inflection point in a very, very humble and respectful way that Microsoft went through 7 years ago, where they decided, do we want to be the best productivity application for the Windows platform, or do we want to be the best productivity application globally for any platform? And so, undercurrents of that are seeping into at least our mindset, have been over the last 2 years. And ultimately, I think the foundation gives us the confidence to be able to invest in problem statements of the future and be able to tie them very intimately to our Jenkins franchise and the customer base that continues to invest in Jenkins, but to basically take a broader lens into the problem statement of the industry and say, based on the solutions we have created, how do we best address those, independent of sort of their, I would say, strong nuclear force to the Jenkins franchise that we have created. So I'm excited by basically that transition that I think is ahead of us over the next 18 months. But by no means does it erode our focus nor our importance on the Jenkins community that's frankly made us who we are and continues to invest at a very aggressive pace for the reasons that you highlighted earlier, which is, if you've trained up 5,000 developers on Jenkins and 80% of your production applications of consequence that you're investing in use Jenkins as a build tool, you want to know that there's a vital industry that's going to be there for you as you modernize those applications and make them a lot more resilient. And we want to be there for our customers for that journey over the next 3 years as well.
Sasha, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, as Anuj said, the amount of developers and the know-how out there is so big, and the number of pipelines that have been written, that's IP. So whatever we end up doing, our commitment is essentially that we don't want to leave anybody behind, right? And so it's great. We understand that we have new use case, new type of technologies, and so on. So all of that is great, and we're going to be talking a lot more of that in the months in the coming months. But what's important for us is to be able to leave nobody behind, bring everybody along that journey in a constructive way, and so that's really what we're aiming for.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's leave no one behind, but it's also paint the roadmap so people know what that future is, right?
Exactly.
So we've got a future on the platforms that we're on. I'm curious. You could sort of look at this question on either side of what didn't we do well, or what were the learnings that we have. That you have specifically, Anuj, from the security industry. I mean, I've been doing security and software for a long time, and I have my own opinions about what we kind of did right and haven't done right yet in security industry. What are some of those lessons that you think you bring with you of, like, we learned fourth time it took to get this right, but this is what we need to do, that you bring into this industry?
I would say there's at least two, and then maybe a third one. The first is never confuse technology with the outcome you're creating. And the second is never confuse the sophistication of the product with the operational capability of the customer to drive value from that product. And I think those were those are critical lessons that I think any industry can learn from, but especially in security. The third one is actually a slight twist on that. What I'm excited by in terms of CloudBees is, the one thing in security that unfortunately does not always get discussed is you're sometimes selling on the fear and anxieties of your customers. And that is I think reflective of the sentiment of your customers. So in some ways, it's not wrong, but it's not perfectly right either. I think the great thing about sort of having the DevOps platform vision that we have is we sell on the hope of IT rather than the fear of IT. And I think the security industry has started to realize that their sales pitch needs to be balanced between the protective nature of the solutions and the transformative nature of the solutions. I think we have a sort of different mix relative to the capabilities and outcomes we create. But the first two lessons are ones that we absolutely ensure we stay disciplined around, which is it's great to have products and features and capabilities that you think are unique, but ultimately, how does that synchronize with the outcome that the customer is trying to create for themselves? And are we synchronous with that, or are we asynchronous to that? And then the second one is, again, tied to those. Everyone wants to work on the next new thing. Everyone wants to talk about the next new thing. But the operational reality that the customers find themselves in is going to vary across geographies, across verticals, across size of customer, and across whether they're market leaders or they're in the middle of the pack in terms of their industry for all the right reasons. So indexing the usability of your platform to the operational reality of your customers, I think, is very critical to ensuring that they derive the outcome necessary, right? The analogy would be you can buy an $80,000 car or a $20,000 car. If your customer doesn't realize the difference in terms of the outcome that truly matters for them, then you should ask yourself, right, why you're actually investing in building an $80,000 car. So we want to be very, very disciplined with regards to the calibration of our product to the needs of our customers. And that's something that I think was so vastly clear in the security industry, because every week a new company gets funded that aims to actually solve the problem that the 500 other companies that got funded in the last 52 weeks did not solve.
Just to add a comment to that, I think the emphasis in this industry is on the workflow, the pipeline. It's getting the work done and getting that out in a certain way, quicker, faster, better, whatever you might, or more secure for that matter, as opposed to battening down the hatches in one other area, creating more alarms and alerts, and overwhelmed security people don't need another tool. We're on the automation side of this. We're on the creating it, continuous improvement of that. So it seems like your experiences there will be super helpful, and of course, all the things
I think
as well.
Absolutely. Just to touch on, a word you use, creating value as opposed to protecting value. Both are important. I think we want to, on the margin, we want to be on the side of creating value in a secure manner.
Fantastic. Well, I hope you'll come back as you spend more time working on the strategy and engaging with customers. Love to hear about what you've learned and where you're planning to go next. And I'm sure there are lots of CloudBees, Jenkins customers and users. They'll love to hear that too. So you have an open invitation to come back and talk with us again.
Thank you so much, Mitch. Look forward to seeing you at DevOps World in 2 weeks, as you said, and seeing some of that Florida sunshine as well. We're seeing it here, but we're seeing it with the heat. So look forward to seeing you in person.
DevOpsWorld.com. Check it out.
DevOpsWorld.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi, and welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us for another episode of the SRE Show. We have a great topic. We are talking about observability and SRE, 3 sides of the same coin. We'll play on DevOps and SRE and observability. I'm here with my co-host partner, Austin Parker. How you doing, Austin?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. You're appropriately dressed in all black background. You've got the look. You got the vibe, man.
Just posting from my cave.
From the cave. Excellent.
From the SRE cave.
We've got an amazing panel. I can't wait to get started here and hear some perspectives on the kind of interplay between observability and the SRE role. And why don't we do this? How about just have folks do a brief introduction of each of yourselves? And then, Austin, if you want to kind of kick off the conversation, we'll get things rolling. So how about Michael? Would you want to start us out first?
Sure. Thanks, Mitch. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Keogh. I'm a senior staff security engineer at Confluent. Before that, I was a senior staff SRE at LinkedIn, working on everything from the traffic stack to low-level databases, and of course, all the observability in between.
Fantastic. And how about Andy?
Yeah, my name is Andy Grabner. I am a DevRel, I would call myself like that, at Dynatrace. Been doing this for the last 14 years and trying to help people understand, how observability can actually help them, whether they are DevOps and SRE. And thanks for the opportunity today to share my thoughts.
Awesome. And Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica Kerr. On Twitter, I'm Jessitron. And I really care about systems thinking and how that applies to development and how development is contributing to it. In particular, I'm excited about learning from our software, which is why I work in observability. So I work at Honeycomb now.
Fantastic. Anna, good day. How are you?
Hi there. Good. I'm a staff developer advocate at Lightstep. Prior to doing this, I was a chaos engineering expert at SRE turned chaos engineering expert. And I come from a self-taught background, constantly thinking about how to make our systems more reliable and continue learning from them.
Excellent. I just want to thank again the team at Lightstep, Austin, for sponsoring the show. It's a pleasure to work with you, all of you. Why don't you do a proper introduction of yourself too?
I'm Austin Parker. I'm head of DevRel at Lightstep. I kind of have an interesting way into the industry, but I'm focused on observability because I think it's the most powerful tool we have to keep people from getting woken up at 3 a.m. and trying to figure out what's going wrong with their systems. And I think there's a lot of reasons why you can get woken up at 3 a.m. trying to figure out what's going wrong with your system. Not necessarily all technical and not all based in technology.
Way too many calls like that for sure. I know what you mean.
and most of them actually aren't necessarily due to technology. That's the interesting part.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Well, why don't you kick off our topic, kind of this interplay between observability and the SRE role, if you will, and we'll kick things off.
Well, just to kind of, I guess, to start, it's interesting because I think when you look at, the history of sort of words in the sphere, right, of what we call certain things, observability and SRE have kind of had concomitant growth in a lot of ways. People can point to the Google, site reliability engineering handbook that was published as being one of the drivers, I think, of organizations adopting observability practices. And I also think that the flip side of that is true, right? That observability helps drive SRE practices in the organization. So one thing that I actually want to speak to something that Jess brought up is that almost in a way these are kind of drifting apart, right? Where observability is starting to become more something that is focused at like the developer level versus being strictly in the vein of SREs. And so I think a good way to talk about start off is ask the question, like, is observability and monitoring something that is really just for SREs, or is it something that has, a pretty broad based application across the entire software development, the SDLC, as it were?
I think this is one place where DevOps has a lot to teach dev, because observability is essential for SRE. When you're troubleshooting something, you need to be able to see into it, and you need to generate the knowledge you need in the moment. And developers have this idea from college days that they should already know everything they need to know about the language and the software. And we're continually recognizing that that can't be the case. We need to generate that knowledge. And this is where observability can expand from SRE and help us.
I think from my perspective, it's interesting how observability evolved, because I know a lot of us have worked in the space for a long, long time. I remember when I started in the observability days, it was 14 years ago. We still called it monitoring. Everything started out with APM, application performance monitoring. And it was a very tough thing to actually get observability into a system, right? There were just a couple of vendors that built very specific tools, agents that got visibility. And I think it was also back then, I guess, not cheap to get that visibility. And I think the great thing about where we are now, 2022, we have a lot of great open source standards, a lot of great open source tools. It's easier, accessible, and therefore we also get more visibility, not just in production, but as you said, early on in the development cycle, integrated in your development tools. And I remember, and this is something that kind of I have on my bucket list in my life, because when I started analyzing distributed traces the first time 14 years ago, when I started my journey in that area, the number one problem that I saw why systems were either slow or failing or not scaling were basic things like inefficient access to backend systems. The N+1 query problem was always something, right? Making inefficient database calls in the loop. And I've showed so many developers, how easy it is to fix these things, but they were kind of surprised. Oh, really? My Hibernate is doing this? I thought Hibernate is the magic thing that will make everything efficient when I access the data. And then really it's making 1,000 calls to the database I didn't know. Now, however, I think we have the tools in place baked into existing runtimes and frameworks that highlight these things right away into the development IDE. If I think organizations are leveraging these tools, right, and educating the developers like when they get started. And so kind of coming back to my bucket list, I hope I never in the not so distant future have to look at the distributed trace where I see the N+1 query problem because it never made it into a production system crashing your website, for instance. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've all seen that meme of the burning house and the little girl saying it worked on my desktop. It's fine now. And as an industry, we've sort of frowned away from that sort of thinking between developers and SREs to where production is a shared responsibility. And to Andy's point, over the last 10 or so years, we've built the tools that allow us to have common metrics being emitted from our systems. So, developers don't need to sort of understand the custom implementation of some sort of metric. It is standard across the board. And so as SREs, we can help teach them those basics of what those metrics mean and how they sort of work, and really up-level our partners to ensure that before it goes into production, they've got the understanding and the means to go and understand what the application is doing before it is fully deployed to production.
I think to Michael's point too is like, as SREs, we have trained our teams like, hey, you need to set up like best practices with observability. This is a stack for organization. But I think, at least in my experience, the last 5 years, we've also gotten better about teaching them what it is, where it's like, let me actually give you a little bit more of an overview of what we're looking at and why these are the metrics and the systems, the parts of the system that we're actually going to care about. And that allows for them to actually carry a little bit more of what they call like skin in the game, because it is their code running on production, and that they actually start carrying a little bit more of it, and that they want to help it get better in a sense.
It was interesting. One of the things that you all made me think about is in the development world, we're constantly abstracting things away, right? With languages, with services, with you name it. I mean, that's part of what development is about, doing more with less code in some ways. But that also abstracts the way the details, kind of what I think you were talking about, Andy, of, you're making tens of thousands of calls to the database. Did you realize when you did that one thing? And my experience has been the best developers I enjoyed working with the most were the developers that had a pretty good knowledge of kind of the full stack. And I don't mean the the marketing term full stack, but all of the software that they're working in, from the OS to the database to the network to infrastructure software. Not that they're expert in all of it, but to kind of design great software, you really have to understand a good bit of that. Not that they know all of it in all detail, but it seems like that's part of the gap that we're talking about, is how do we fill in that? You might have abstracted that away in your code, but here's what's going on, and here's what we need to do to solve a problem or make it perform better, whatever it might be. True? Agree?
Hibernate makes your life easier as a developer, and you need to know when that's a problem, and observability can give you a clue with that.
I do think it's funny, though, and I'm going to actually argue against myself here for a moment, because I've to the point that Andreas made earlier, right, about open standards, right? So we have open telemetry now in the observability space to provide a standard framework for creating, generating, and then exporting, representing telemetry data like metrics, distributed traces, logs. And the objective of open telemetry, in my mind, is to not have a external agent that you plug in order to, get that telemetry data, but to be built into the underlying runtime or frameworks, for Hibernate itself to emit distributed traces and metrics, right? That you as a developer don't have to think about, well, how do I get this telemetry? You just have it kind of for free, gratis, right? But that is also an abstraction, right? Like we keep, the more we kind of push these details and we elide these details from the developer, yes, we're giving them more information, but we're not necessarily teaching them, hey, this is how you actually represent your system, right? We're moving away in some ways, I think, from having this kind of idea of craft where you as a developer are responsible for going in and writing the code that defines how the system should operate and what we expect the system to do. And we want to push all that off into these agents, these invisible instrumentation packages. I don't know if this is like a bad, I don't think maybe this isn't a value judgment, but I do think it's an interesting, destination, or what seems to be the destination of a lot of what we're trying to do right now in observability, or even in SRE teams, right? Like the concept of platform engineering, and you're just providing platforms to your devs, and they don't have to think about any of this stuff. They use the platform, and everything's great. Is it great? Like, is that actually upskilling developers?
Well, I think OpenTelemetry only solves one problem. OpenTelemetry solves the problem of how do we get the data. And I think what you are alluding to is if you are a platform team, or if you are providing a platform to your organization, you need to figure out what to do with this data. And I think this is also where the value prop still comes in from vendors, right? Like we have a couple of vendors here on that panel. How can we make sense out of the data and not have to maybe teach developers in school what every single metric means, but that the platform itself that ingests the open telemetry data then alerts on strange behavior, right? Coming back to Hibernate, I would expect that if Hibernate is properly instrumented, then the Hibernate community can say, hey, and here are some patterns that I would like every observability platform, right, just to automatically detect and say this might be something to look into, because making 100 or 1,000 database calls from a single distributed trace is typically not what we see. And so I think this is, but for me, OpenTelemetry, as I said, solves the how do we get to the data, because this was always a challenge, where at least we got challenged from our customers. They said, hey, why do I need to install an agent? I don't trust you. Well, now the power is back to you. You can instrument based on open source libraries. So you solve the data capturing problem, but let us still solve the data analytics problem, or whoever the us is, can be the open source community as well. But I think this is what the next step is. OpenTelemetry only solves one problem of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do have that sort of data problem solved. But it is sort of how do we build the layers of abstraction here? So going back to a database example earlier, if we have high 95th percentile latency, we need the tools where we can then break that down for both SREs and developers to understand? So is that coming from a select query, an update query, and then, go to the next level to actually go and look at those queries and those runtimes and group by the types of queries? Those are the sort of observability tools that we need in the community, so that, you can have your layers of abstraction for simplicity, but you can also sort of go through each one to actually understand what the underlying problem is in an efficient manner.
The beauty of Hibernate implementing its open telemetry instrumentation, or as Hibernate specific instrumentation of it, is that those spans can express what's important in that library. And it gives the library author the opportunity to tell the operator, SRE, or developer, hey, look, this is what's going on. There's a story there. And then Andy makes the point that, like, interpreting that story, saying, is this normal, is something we don't have a generic solution for.
And I think to Austin's point earlier, where it was mentioned that it's like we're just building platforms and we're building a lot of abstraction layers. Like, I do agree with you, the amount of abstraction layers that we build sometimes is very questionable, and like it makes it harder to debug. We're not up leveling our engineers, like you said. But at the same time, like, I think of what it was like to be developing software at Uber, where there was already 1,200 microservices. That's like having standardized platforms of like, this is the way that we're going to be using React.js scaffold to build internal applications. And then these are the ways that you're going to containerize it and send it, and make sure to use M3 for metrics and observability. Like, because there was a guided, it got created a set of guides of how to actually go from, this is my idea of a application I want to build internally to get this all the way to production, to integrating with the rest of the marketplace. If such things weren't created, I think the developer would not be able to make an impact within 6 months to a year. So to an extent, like in bigger enterprises or larger startups, like things like this do need to happen more organically in order to up-level those engineers to actually get their job done.
And are you arguing for the structure kind of brings more productivity, and you're balancing sort of the artistic nature of how you want to design software versus, you can't build that whole stack yourself. It already exists. We're all sharing a similar approach, an architecture, whatever it might be.
I think the way I see it is like, as you take the walk of building your organization, you have to make different trade-offs every single month. And you kind of have to think of like, what type of engineers do I want to be hiring for? Do I want to be hiring folks that are going to scale out a platform to then allow folks to just come in a little easier and just get building? Or do I want a lot more builders out there that are going to do things like for one-off cases versus try to make a larger impact? So I think there's like no right or wrong answer in my book. I think a lot of it is just the way that you want to lead engineering teams.
Yeah, you are trying to increase productivity, but you also have to know what's there, right? You have to know what you can reuse, or if there's a certain pattern or part of the stack that you're using. I'm curious from an SRE perspective, has OpenTelemetry sort of delivered on the promise of OpenTelemetry of standardizing the data model and the access to that data? And has that been a big boon for us yet, or is it still in its development, or we're waiting to see some of the benefits from that? Where are we in our life of OpenTelemetry and what it's supposed to do for us?
I feel like I just got started on my OpenTelemetry data, so I can't OpenTelemetry journey that I can't speak for how it's 100%. So if folks want to comment, go ahead.
I mean, as a completely biased source here, I actually I think it's funny because, and I've said this publicly several times, the level of adoption of OpenTelemetry right now is completely like mind-boggling when you think about it in the context of where OpenTelemetry is at as a project and where it can potentially be, or where we want it to be in 5 years, just to pick a number, right?
You're saying it's good, right? The adoption is good.
I mean, I'm saying the adoption, it's high, but it's surprisingly high for how rough it is. Because I think this is the thing that gets maybe lost in the sauce a little bit, is that OpenTelemetry is designed almost as a framework, as an observability framework to build observability tools with, not necessarily as your like primary way you interact with it. So a good example is there's OpenTelemetry Java, the Java API and SDK, and then there's the OpenTelemetry Java instrumentation package. And really, when you get down to it, like how OpenTelemetry should work is more stuff like that, where you have this agent basically that you drop in, and it handles a lot of the setup for you and instrumenting your hibernates and your springs and this and that and the other. And then you use that in conjunction with some helpers like the ability to annotate your code, little @trace or whatever, and get extra spans and use the API to kind of add some attributes and stuff to those. But what we've seen instead is a lot of people actually just using like core OpenTelemetry and going out and like writing instrumentation code in it. And it's like, that's cool, that's fine, you can do that, but I don't think that's how you should be using it. We want this to be built in to the frameworks and the software that you're using. So examples where that's done, .NET integrates OpenTelemetry into the System Diagnostics FCL, or BCL actually, sorry. Rust and Erlang both integrated into kind of runtime level tracing packages, or Tokio, I think in the case of Rust, which is, very conventional way to do this for that language, and it is a native experience, and a lot of other packages use it. And so you drop it in, you hook up OpenTelemetry, and now the traces and the instrumentation that you've built in your language with that sort of native low-level access to what's going on can now be expressed and emitted to a bunch of different places for analysis. So in 5 years, I hope there's a lot more of that. I don't necessarily... I actually don't think in 5 years people should be using the OTel SDK quite as much as they do today. It should really mostly be done through, again, different levels, integrating it into the language itself, or to the language runtime, or to your framework, or some abstraction over the moving parts of OpenTelemetry. And I'm curious, because there's a bunch of other observability people on here. Feel free to disagree with me. I am merely a voice in the desert.
No, I agree with you because, and I know Mitch said in the beginning we should not have a panel where we just agree with each other, but I agree with you in an aspect that the people that build these runtimes know best, right? What to instrument and what is important. And in the past, we as vendors that built agents that did runtime instrumentation on the fly, we always had to reverse engineer and had to figure out what is actually best, even though we didn't know the runtime as good as the engineers of those runtimes. So I think that's definitely a good thing. Where I think it's interesting, though, you said, right, let's use the Java auto or instrumentation agent. So bringing it in another agent that is doing runtime changes. And I wonder how that will then go in the argument of what people are now saying, hey, I don't want to install an agent that dynamically modifies my code. I want to have it all under my control. I think that's going to be an interesting piece.
Well, so far it's going poorly because people will complain when you're like, oh yeah, you should use OTel. And they're like, but only one agent can be installed at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, eating growing pains, right?
No, my question is also, why do I trust the OTel agent that is doing the instrumentation more than some vendors that have built agents for the last 10 to 15 years?
People like open source. They like to be able to look at the code and feel like they own it.
Mm-hmm.
And because it quite crucially means that they can tell the vendor to go shove it when they don't like how much it costs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, open telemetry for us also as vendor is great because one of the biggest challenges for us is right now keeping and maintaining our agents that do the instrumentation, because there's a new runtime and a new library coming out every day. And so putting this to the runtime vendors and the library vendors and the framework vendors makes it also easier for us to consume the data, and you as well, right? I mean, we don't have to deal with this anymore, and this is great. But it's still interesting from a discussion perspective. No, I don't trust you because you build an agent that does something. Yes, I can configure it, but I still don't trust you. But I trust this piece that somebody also wrote that I don't know, but I trust it now.
Yeah,
I understand the argument of open source, and I can look at the source code, but I'm still wondering how this discussion turns out.
I mean, I don't think there's any reason that you should. I mean, some might argue that. So it's interesting, right? The obvious reason that OTel has as much vendor support as it does is because people accept the argument that instrumentation agents have become commodified, and that there's no actual difference between the Datadog agent, the Dynatrace agent, and a Honeycomb Beeline or whatever. Because it's all effectively the same code doing the same thing. It's trying to observe, hook into the behavior of an existing library, and on transaction start, on transaction end, There's only so many things that a SQL client can do. There's only so many things that an HTTP or gRPC server can do. There's only so many things that the Kafka client does. Vendors, I think, correctly realize that the millions and millions and millions of dollars that they spend every year on their agents and on the care and feeding and maintenance and updates to them is a cost that they probably don't want to spend. And it would be more fiscally responsible if they could convince the open source community to do all that work for free. That's the game for the vendor, right? And I say this while literally wearing a vendor hat. It's an interesting, and this is actually an interesting learning we had from Open Tracing, because I was a maintainer on that as well. And one of the reasons Open Tracing was designed the way it was, where it was just for background, Open Tracing was a vendor neutral API for writing distributed tracing code. But there was no implementation of it. So if you wanted to implement Open Tracing, you had to create a implementation that supported the API. So there was the Jaeger tracer, which supported the Open Tracing API, and there was the Lightstep tracer that supported the Open Tracing API, and Datadog, their APM library supported the Open Tracing API, and it's just re-implementations of this API. And the reason it was done that way is because there was this assumption by the designers of Open Tracing that vendors would not want to, they would want to customize things. They would not want to just say, oh, we'll go use this open source thing, help you, but we don't own it, we don't control it, right? It's that level of, I think this is, in some ways, this is just the market that we're selling into, or the market of people that would do this in the first place. They really don't care that much because, things like Kubernetes, we're so used to that now, right? Like, as an industry, we have moved beyond the need, in a lot of cases, for ironclad support guarantees and, proprietary code. This isn't 2000 and we're not buying everything from Microsoft anymore. We accept that our software is running on things that are out there publicly.
We realized that we cannot buy the illusion of perfect or perfectly supported code.
Yeah, it's the cathedral and the bazaar, and the bazaar won, but I guess with tour guides, maybe
figured out we're in the matrix. we're batteries.
This is super far off topic, but this is a super. I mean, as someone that grew up, someone that kind of got into technology, in the late '90s, or the mid to late '90s, when I was a teenager, and reading about open source, right, and reading about reading the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and reading the Cathedral and Bazaar. Yes. Fuck ESR, by the way, but these are transformative ways to think about things at the time, and they don't really get discussed a lot anymore because we have this default assumption of open source won. But it's really interesting to interrogate that and be like, well, did it actually win, or did we just replace the cathedral with a different cathedral?
There's a podcast for you.
Yeah, there's another episode of this. Anyway, SRE. Someone else talk about SRE real quick.
Austin. So in the world of SRE, who kind of owns open telemetry and the observability tools when someone is implementing, a collection of tools and some open source technology? What's the role of the SRE in that? Do they tend to own big parts of that? Are they helping instrument things? Are they more of a user of those tools? What's the pattern that we see having developing or already in use?
I'd be interested in other people's opinions on this. What I tend to see is, and I think this is changing. It used to be is the SREs would actually wind up doing a lot of the actual instrumentation work, or the ones that were kind of responsible for the instrumentation. But I think that is starting to shift, and it's kind of getting shifted left a bit into the developers being responsible for instrumentation. But again, I'm curious what other people have seen in the panel.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is that shift for developers to own the implementation, but there's still a responsibility for SREs as the systems engineers, the people who sort of understand how all the puzzle pieces come together to sort of set the requirements of how something should be implemented or instrumented rather, and then to also run some of those systems that collect that data and then display it, alert on it, etc. There's still, I think, generally the expectation that we own the how that data gets used throughout, the engineering ecosystem.
How about anybody else? What's your experience?
I think it heavily varies depending on who you talk to, right? I mean, there's no one size fits all software engineering company. That's why I think it's hard to say who owns it. I also see, like Michael just said, a shift left, not just because it's a cool marketing term that we've overused for the last years. But I still think that at least what I see in most organizations is that SREs at least are there to say, hey, in order to run reliable systems, we have some experience. And in order for you to do this, if you want your application to run in production, you want to make sure that we get availability monitoring. We get the basic monitoring of things that can go wrong. We want to make sure who is responsible so that we know if something fails, we know who to, contact. So I think SREs are there to really enforce the kind of the best practices, also a strange term, but the good practices. And the more SREs can build this into platforms, the better this scales. Because otherwise, you need a lot of SREs for a lot of engineers, and the more we can automate into tools, the better it scales. But just my observation. But in general, there's a lot of flavors in organizations, right? Who is responsible for what? Also, historically, I think who initially brought monitoring in. And typically, monitoring came in for some business critical apps, and then it kind of started to evolve. And then this team had experience, and then this team became responsible for monitoring and observability. And sometimes they have managed to escape this and kind of handed it off, but sometimes not. There's still the central monitoring team that everybody goes to.
Thank you for more eloquently saying everything I was thinking.
I've seen a lot of people working on implementing Honeycomb, and they're like, I'm the observability lead, or I'm the observability person. And on one hand, observability is an emergent property of the systems, and you can't centralize that in a person, but somebody's got to operate the collector.
Mm-hmm.
And also spread information to the development teams on how to do instrumentation and how to look at their traces and graphs and what to do with it. So maybe it's these monitoring teams that have now changed names to observability, but also I see companies hiring for observability in particular. So at least in large companies, it's becoming its own baby.
I was going to mention that I've usually seen Andy's way as well, where it's like an SRE is the one bringing in like what is going from monitoring to observability, or just more of like, these are the best practices. And of course, as they're able to like platformatize like their best practices, the easier it is. But I was recently helping a friend look for a new job opportunity from sysadmin to SRE, and I was going through job postings, and I was surprised to see the amount of observability specific job postings that I was finding. But at the same time, I kind of see it as this is a very nice to have, because like once you're comfortable in like observability, it's a lot easier to go in and help an organization get this done right, like as like that specialization, because you have knowledge of one, what best practices are, people you can contact, but also it's a lot easier to get the job done due to that muscle memory. So I think we're starting to see a good shift in the industry. Same thing with folks that work in reliability. They try to stay in that focus because it's like covering a lot of like strategy decisions that can happen in an organization.
But it makes sense too, the size of the organization, right? And it's going to dictate a lot of one person embodying multiple roles versus specializing. And tell me if I'm wrong, it seems like observability, certainly from an SRE perspective, it's not a set and forget, right? I mean, yes, we need to update collectors and, do our activities of kind of keeping things running, but the applications or behaviors are changing. What we're doing, we're rolling out more Kubernetes now. We're doing it in multiple clouds instead of one, or we're trying serverless in our app, or whatever it is, the things that we're observing are changing. So it seems like while we can shift things left to kind of help the developers implement that instrumentation, there's also knowing what to look at and how to understand it and actualize that information, do something with it in a changing
and the refinement. I mean, as you look at your traces and your aggregations, and you say, I wish I knew this customer ID or whatever, and then you go back and you add it.
There's also like a refinement process through actual, human being facing process changes, right? Like as you're doing, as you're refining your organization, you're refining like how is information shared and how are our on-call processes iterating over time, and how are we handling retrospectives, and how are we handling, all the really important, the important people to people part of actually doing work. Like that also is something that you needs to reflect on your observability practice. And how are we taking the things we're learning from observability and putting into that? How are we taking, changes in on-call or changes in incident response and having that, having a process to go back in and add instrumentation or change instrumentation or so on and so forth. I do think that there is, like we touched on that with the whole who maintains the collector thing. I think that really what we have is that there's actually two parts to observability. There's the system modeling part, and then there's the secondary question: how do I like the pipeline, right, of the observability pipeline, cost efficient, to store this cost effectively and query this and make decisions about what part of it goes where and how are, what's the fiddly bit parts of getting alerts done and so on and so on and so forth. So this is I don't think this is a realization that is quite made it to sort of job recs yet, but I do think that there is kind of two big parts to it, and it's that instrumentation and pipeline are really separate questions of observability, and the way you solve those and the teams that are responsible for those are very different.
Yeah, I would have put that in the platform team. Really? Yeah. Yeah, I see observability teams often attached to platform teams.
I guess,
but that's make this just work for you.
Yeah. I mean, I just see it as like the idea of an observability team to me is like the idea of a DevOps team, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's an emergent property of the system. You cannot actually centralize it. You can have a team that's more of an enabling team that helps other teams move toward the healthier system.
But I think the core part of instrumentation almost isn't a I mean, I guess there's also like this is also a subdivided question, right? Because there is actually instrumentation and metrics and things that like an SRE team or like a more ops focused person is going to care about that the developers don't.
True.
So within each of these spheres, within SRE, within platform, within sort of the more tooling and internal enablement side, you have people that want to do instrumentation for their tools, but also for their resources. And then on the more pure dev side, it gets a little bit more into just doing instrumentation.
Your custom instrumentation.
Or not even custom instrumentation, but again, like the modeling, right? Like if I'm the developer, if I'm a team and I'm sitting down, like we're building our cool new service that's going to do X, Y, and Z, how do we represent that? Like what are the attributes that we need to put on there in our spans and in our metrics and in our logs? How are we writing these logs to be, how are we writing this telemetry to be consumed by humans and machines? How are we defining SLOs for, what we're comfortable with in terms of the actual objective, our actual objectives, but and so on and so forth. Like that ideal state representation should not necessarily be enforced upon you. Like it shouldn't be an observability team coming in saying like, oh, we're going to write all this implementation for you. The SREs, the platform people should be saying, here's kind of the roadmap, or here's the guide. Like you must be this tall to ride, right? You got to have this much stuff.
Minimum.
Yeah. Here's the minimums. Here's the shared language we're all going to use in terms of attributes and making sure that we're all going in the same direction. But then when it comes to the actual implementation part, that really should be on individual dev teams. And I think that advocacy for that really should be almost more of like at a developer level, right? Like you need dev teams to tell other dev teams is like, oh yeah, we get through our backlog so much quicker, or it's like when something breaks and there's a ticket, it's like, it's so much faster for us to fix it because we went through and we did the work and we understand the system now and we have this telemetry to show for it. And that makes our lives better.
The State of DevOps report says teams with good observability practices spend more time coding.
There you go.
There you go. Can't argue with Dora.
I'm not going to argue with that for sure. Well, we have just a few minutes left. We're almost at the end of our time together. I'm curious, Austin, what are your thoughts on where do we go next in terms of SRE and observability? We talked about the instrumentation of application. The developer might be doing maybe more of the platform part of that, and then also sort of the operational aspects of setting up observability. But I thought you also raised a really good point about it's still young and growing and maturing. Yeah. Observability is not 20 years old, right?
It's still early days for all of this, and I think the next big thing is really just shifting. It's both shifting at the low and the high end, right? It's how do we make it so that smaller teams can start off on the right foot and have a clear path to, starting out with traces, right, versus logs, learning these best practices, building systems with that in mind. And then on the high end, it's how do we make it easier for large organizations and complex organizations to adopt best practices for their existing, production apps, because you can't just tell. I mean, in many cases, it's literally an impossibility to go back in and write instrumentation in, an existing application. Like the code either doesn't exist, or people don't have access to it, or the way the organization is designed is not conducive to it. So that's kind of the two paths, I think. The small scale, like how do we start off the right way, and the large scale, how do we make this achievable for orgs that are doing sort of a transformation. But I'd be interested in what other people think too.
Any parting comments, thoughts?
I definitely agree. Go ahead, Andy.
No, if you comment on him, because I have another wish for the future.
Sure. So I think there's definitely that initial data problem to solve. And obviously, the earlier you think about that and solve that, the easier the journey will be, because everything grows from there. One thing that we haven't really discussed today, beyond sort of collecting the data, but it is what we do with the data. So, we get traces, we get alerts, etc. And there is, I personally think, still a gap where we don't have sort of very standardized run books or even auto remediation run books of what we do with that data before we go and wake somebody up. So if you go and have, say a high thread pool utilization or a, high P95 database latency, what steps does your various observability alerting tools take before you go and page someone at 2 a.m.? All of us here, I'm sure, have done an on-call, dislike it, don't like being woken up. And so I think there is still ways for us to go as an industry to sort of get the machines to do some work for us before we get woken up, and have, by the time we are awake, have all the information, sort of all these pre-triage steps and all the data there for us, so we don't have to go and spend an extra hour at 2 a.m. in the morning to go and work out what's going wrong.
Well, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a nodding panel by everybody on the panel is worth about 10,000 words. So, Andy, you want to share one more kind of wish, and then we'll wrap things up on that?
I think this was kind of going into the similar direction, right? Because what do we do now? We are flooding people with a lot of distributed traces, and they need to figure out what are the patterns we really need to look at. So what I would like to see is, besides framework vendors instrumenting it with OpenTelemetry, also providing some rules, some patterns that then the observability platforms that consume the data can analyze and then say, hey, it seems that your framework, your runtime is not acting based on what the vendor of this framework or runtime wants it to be. And then it can, as you said, either suggest a remediation action or just highlight it to developer that they made a bad implementation and not using the library as intended. Because, as I said in the beginning, I don't want to, when I retire at some point, I don't want to see distributed traces anymore with the N+1 query problem. This should be something from the past.
Second time you've mentioned that.
Exactly. That's why it's really important for me.
It clearly is. Well, thank you all of you. It's been a pleasure. Great conversation, man. I learned a ton of things. So I'm sure our audience picked up a lot as well, too. So Jessica, thank you. Michael, Andy, and of course, Anna and Austin. Great partnering with you on our SRE show. I was going to say SRE Observability edition of the show episode. So thanks for joining us. And we look forward to everyone coming back for our next conversation. We'll see you soon.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. Cody J. Brown here with some upcoming programs from Techstrong Learning. So first up, on Tuesday, September 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Fair Winds takes us into Kubernetes security guardrails. There's a long list of things you need to do right to ensure the security of your Kubernetes environments. Guardrails can help you ensure that your entire team is consistently doing the right thing. Following, on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, DevOps.com is hosting Keeping the Pulse of Your Data, Why You Need Data Observability. Our host from Precisely will address the need for data observability, how it can prevent issues downstream, and why you should implement these practices now to prevent real-world issues. And first thing Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, DevOps.com and Plutor are presenting a new equation. The sum of your SREs and the observations from your value stream management are equal to a greater customer experience. Class is in session and you will not want to be late. So that's all I've got for you right now, but we do have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning, so stay tuned.
The Engineering the Change Scholarship Program offers a life-changing opportunity for a winner from an underrepresented community to change their lives by becoming a full-stack software developer.
The background that you might see that it's a weakness, it's a strength in this field because everyone is constantly looking for people that are going to bring new ideas.
It's an intense 12-week course that is not for the timid.
For real. Who's mastering this right now? Because I sure am not.
So you guys are badass. Like as a class, you guys are crushing it.
You've got to be dedicated. You've got to be ready to do it. Your life has to be ready for it. Follow us as we go through this cohort's Engineering the Change winner on their journey to becoming full-stack engineers.
Welcome! Say with great power comes great responsibility.
Take it down to 3 finalists. Toria, I'm going to ask you, who really kind of stood out for you?
The 3 people that stood out to me the most was Stephanie and another woman named Carly and a man named Donald.
Mitchell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. Actually, I think those are 3 great candidates, and I mean, you know very well, right, what it takes to go through this process.
Look, I still love good written and oral skills. I like people who can speak well. I like people who really could write well.
All right.
And I'm going to tell you something. To your point about Stephanie, is it Stephanie Sanchez? Yeah, Stephanie Sanchez. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And bring her into
the golden
finals.
buzzer.
So,
she's in.
The 2 other people you mentioned, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this.
Yeah.
She said something like, her brothers could do it, why couldn't she? Mm-hmm. Right? Wasn't that in the essay?
Yeah,
And-
that's something that stuck with me, especially as a woman.
Yeah.
Because I think that for her, she was like, if they can do it, and there's not enough women in tech, like she was like, I can do it too, and I love that.
I say send Carly to Hollywood.
Golden buzzer?
Yeah. Donald Bazell, really nice guy. What I liked about his essay is his genuineness. Is that a word?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
being genuine.
He's genuine.
Yeah.
Right? You got it from him. My only caveat on this is he really doesn't have any tech experience.
Yeah.
So if it's your vote and Mitchell, you don't object, I say let's give Donald the last ticket to Hollywood. And those are our 3 finalists for Engineering the Change. Let's bring them in for interviews and pick our winner.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Sounds
All
good.
right. We'll see you on the next show.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Randy Watkins. Randy is CTO with Critical Start. Good to be talking with you, Randy.
Thanks for having me, Mitch.
Awesome. Great to have you too, fellow bass player, musician. We were talking a little bit about that, but let's talk about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about Critical Start.
Yeah, so I'm the CTO at Critical Start. Been here for about 10 years, actually a little bit over 10 years. And Critical Start is the leading provider of managed detection and response services. So all the alerts that are generated by the plethora of security tools that our customers are implementing, we ingest those into our platform. We have a 24/7 security operations center. They do the full investigation and response, essentially lowering the dwell time of attackers and keeping the environments clean.
So center of the target, MSP, sounds like what you do. Is that correct?
The evolution of MSP. I mean, MSPs to me were more geared around providing compliance, and we're more geared around providing security.
Okay, security operations and response and all. Good exactly. Stuff. Well, there's tons of things we could talk about in security. Always something interesting going on. We don't need to talk about LastPass incident or whatever. We can jump to where we want to go. But I think one of the things that piqued my interest is talking about M&A, because I've gone through several myself, and sometimes you get to do due diligence, technology due diligence on the company you're acquiring, or if you're being acquired, and a lot of times you don't, right? It's, hi, I'm the security person from such and so, and I work for you now, or vice versa, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you go through a lot of that as the receiver of those customers that are now, hey, by the way, we've got 3 new companies coming on board, help us, right? Where do you start? How do you have that conversation with your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on both sides of the table in various situations, and there's always some element of due diligence done. Now, whether or not it's technical and whether or not technical includes security is anybody's guess. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, what we're used to seeing is, hey, we just acquired this company and they're demanding connection between the 2 domains. They want us to join everything together, federate it, and start sharing between organizations. Let's go. And security is... security has a hard time saying no to the business when the CEO is saying, yes, it happens today. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things that we've done to help our customers, and we fit in various roles. Traditionally, what happens is the company is acquired, the business transaction is done before security really gets a peek behind the covers. Occasionally, we'll have the businesses that are mature enough from a security understanding to do some element of security due diligence before the actual transaction takes place. Rare, but super valuable, right? And we can plug in to those companies that are looking to be acquired to see if there's any malicious activity beforehand. So best case scenario, we get a security due diligence as prior to the transaction as part of the business due diligence. And we go into it knowing, okay, there's some problem areas, there's some missing controls, but there's no active breach. Mm-hmm. More often what happens is the exact opposite. The transaction takes place, security is brought to the table, they're told to federate, we get some level of visibility into the environment, and we see, okay, there is an active breach, or there has been an active breach, and we don't know that it's completely mitigated at this point. So the first step for us is getting visibility into that new entity. And starting to look at, is there any suspicious behavior? Are there any indicators of previous breach? Of course, is there any malware? Is there any callback? I mean, that stuff's pretty easy to find. But it's really going in and doing your own due diligence after the fact, and starting to look for artifacts that would be indicative of a compromise, or look for lateral movement, credential misuse, new logins from legacy or dated accounts, and trying to identify if there's anything that kind of warrant additional suspicion, investigation, response activities, kind of post acquisition.
Now, when you do this, are you doing it as kind of setting it up as a new account or a new whatever in your platform, and then observing and seeing what's going on, looking for those kinds of activities before you start to merge it all together? Or do you just have to sort of do the big bang and make it happen and then watch it?
It depends. Sometimes it's trial by fire. It really depends on the existing security posture of the acquired organization. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you come in and it's a very small acquisition. It's 20 people. They didn't have much security to begin with. Those ones usually get the security diligence done during the transaction or before the transaction because it's relatively easy. Mm-hmm. Do you have antivirus? Do you have EDR? Do you have EPP? Do you have MFA? Do you have a SIM? Those questions are really easy to get knocked out. If the acquired company has a technology that we support as part of our MDR, we'll plug them right in and we'll start doing the monitoring regardless if they're integrated into the parent company or not. If they don't have a good security footprint, we recommend our companies have an acquisition portfolio of technology that they immediately deploy. So if you're using a CrowdStrike or a Microsoft or a SentinelOne or a Palo Alto or something on the endpoint, have those packages ready to go. That way, day one, you can deploy your company's standard for technology, and we can very quickly take over monitoring. So there's less of a kind of a delta between the point in time you made the integration to the point in time we find out there's a breach, and we can lower that dwell time of the attacker.
Did you get much pushback in those situations, or is that pretty well accepted? And acquiring companies says, okay, great, just roll this out. We'll flip this over, kind of get that done up front. Are they pretty accepting of that, or do you get a lot of pushback?
Depends on the size and posture of the acquired company and the acquiring company. I mean, a lot of times, not always, the acquiring company has a stronger security posture, and the acquired company recognizes that and accepts it. We have had instances, though, where the acquired company doesn't accept it. They say, no, we've operated this way. This is the way things work, and this is the way we want it to work. And in those scenarios, I mean, our guidance to CISOs and security directors, the ones in charge of doing the integration, is, hey, try to put the brakes on as much as you can. Try to make a proxy between you and that acquired company. Try to manually copy over data or users. I mean, do a longer integration if you can. And then we've had the occasional scenario where the acquired company is actually a pretty strong security posture, and abiding by the acquiring company would actually weaken their security posture. And for those, it's like, well, let's just get you under monitoring and let's deploy the acquiring company standard without lessening the posture that you already have deployed via policy and procedure. Mm-hmm. So it's always going to be a mixed bag. It really just depends on that security posture coming from the acquired company, and doing enough of an audit beforehand to understand whether or not you're going to help or hurt the situation by immediately merging things together.
I'm sure every situation is different, but I could get why an acquired company might be more secure than the one that's doing the acquiring. Why do you think that is? Is it because they're smaller? Maybe they're newer. Their technology stack has been put together more recently and with services and thinking about security. Is that true, or are there other factors why that's true?
All of the above. I mean, the larger acquiring companies are traditionally older, that maybe they're leveraging some legacy technology, or that they haven't updated the technology. I mean, regardless, older companies, security is typically bolted on as an afterthought. Mm-hmm. These newer companies that are kind of quote unquote born in the cloud, I mean, anything within the last 10 years or so, you start to see security being ingrained inside the infrastructure fabric. It's less of an afterthought and more of a foundational aspect. And those are the ones where, I mean, if you're acquiring a relatively new company, you should expect some level of security posture, cybersecurity awareness, and see that carried through in the controls, policy, and procedure. I mean, the quickest way to find out if the company has a decent posture is just to ask for their cybersecurity policy. And if they have one specifically written for cybersecurity, you're probably in good shape. If it's part of their acceptable use terms, then you may want to dig a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you have AV? Okay, that's our policy, right?
Yeah.
If you will. Well, interesting. So what happens after you hit the 6-month mark or the 1-year mark? You've gone through that initial ingestion phase of, okay, you're up and running, and you're still secure pretty much. But what's the next set of things that happens as companies start to mature? Do people start to integrate everything together? They kind of leave it alone for a while, let the dust settle? What's typical?
Yeah, we'll find out if the environment's breached within the first month. Pretty easily. We usually find out in the first week, and then the first month is cleanup and making sure that everything is status quo. After that, it turns from technology to products or policy and procedure. So, okay, well, now we have this technology implemented. We're able to do a 24/7 monitoring. Where are we escalating alerts to? Is there two separate security teams, two separate help desks? By 6 months, they start merging those
things. All those things. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Where do we send what alerts? What's the standard process for an owned device? I mean, do we nuke and pave? Who do we send that to? What's the re-imaging process? What's the policy around potentially unwanted programs, not just malware, but also pups? That stuff starts to come into play around that 6-month mark. By 1 year, it's usually operating as one homogeneous environment, and it's a single entity. Usually there's not many acquisitions, kind of regardless of size, that take much longer than that.
I'm curious if you run into much kind of thinking about cloud native and containers and microservices, and a lot of people are using observability platforms, which are an evolution of logging, alerting, and adding tracing and a bunch of stuff to it. Is that in terms of your kind of platform and services? Is that something you see as I can imagine acquiring company might have that kind of newer technology also, and the larger company, maybe they're getting started on cloud native, maybe they're into it, but I'll bet in a lot of cases it's not the majority of what they're doing. So that could cause a real rift of, okay, we got to think about these things differently about how we manage the security of those kind of apps. True?
Yes and no. I mean, typically the companies that have those really cloud native microserviced applications, they have some level of security baked into it because there's enough security products out there that kind of fold into the mix relatively easy.
You kind of have to, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're running a DevOps shop, you probably have a DevSecOps practice. Mm-hmm. So usually it's you see the acquiring company kind of back away from it, like, oh, it looks like you have that thing handled. And really, they have no idea how to handle it themselves. And then if there's that much of a maturity gap, we usually see the virtualization leaders of the acquired company step into some sort of leadership role at the acquiring company to start modernizing their applications and bake in some of that same DevSecOps practice and policy. We've actually seen a few acquisitions solely for that purpose. It was almost like an acqui-hire to modernize the applications and bring them up to not just infrastructure best practice, but also security best practice. And as long as your MDR, MSSP can integrate with some of those platforms or can bring in those alerts and telemetry from a SIM, you're in pretty good standing.
Interesting. How about API security? That's kind of a hot topic, within security and within app security. Is that something you run into? Folks are focusing on that?
Unfortunately not. I think if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, I mean, we're probably at the peak of it for API security. So, and on the downtrend. So eventually we'll start to curve back up and then level off. And I think that's probably the next 6 to 12 months. Mm-hmm. API security will become more of an ingrained kind of aspect of overall security. Application security in general has always been someplace where security has lagged just because of the lineage of most security professionals coming from an infrastructure or networking side, not so much a development side. But now you do start to get those security-minded developers that are making the shift to true DevSecOps, API security, application security beyond a traditional SAST and DAST type deployment.
Mm-hmm. It seems to where we've coming from is that's usually handled by the dev group or the app group handling app security, and it's not necessarily an infrastructure. Well, you have kind of platform engineering, right, as a new role, relatively speaking, that starts to merge into that. How about SRE? Is that something you see much of people doing? Site reliability engineering on their staff? Is that a growing trend?
It's growing, but only in very, very large organizations that can afford to have that niche of a program or that tailored of expertise around, and can really focus on that. And honestly, a lot of the customers that we're dealing with are still working on foundational controls. I mean, we're happy to get MFA deployed with conditional access set up. We're happy to have EDR coverage on 95+% of assets. We're happy to have authentication and email logs going into a SIM, which we can monitor. There's room for growth in more foundational areas than looking at some of the more advanced practices, including API security, application security. So in some of the more mature organizations, we see some of that, but they're generally doing a lot of their own monitoring, or they have their own SOC set up.
It seems like one of the lessons of M&A is that's where things get exposed, the good and the bad, right? It kind of comes out in the wash here, and you've got to go back and, okay, we're not all on MFA. We're not all whatever, right? So let's get that set up, get it done right. Of course, it drifts from there before the next acquisition or whatever. But that seems like it is a good time to take care of those things that you should have taken care of before. Maybe really needed to if you've been breached or something. Any kind of parting thoughts? We're just about the end of our time here. In terms of lessons learned or other things you might share with folks about, consider this if you're looking at or going through an acquisition.
Yeah, having a good procedure that's agreed upon by the executive leadership team at the organization, if you're going to be hot and heavy in acquisitions, is always good. That way, there's no surprise from the CEO that says, get this done. You can point to the policy and say, hey, you signed off on this policy. We're following this. And then also, to your last point, looking at something that assesses posture at a very high level, just to make sure there's some level of cohesivity and structure to the security program. There's a lot of new companies coming out, Axonia, Sevco, 6 Sense come to mind, that are looking at posture from a very basic level of, do you have AV installed? Do you have patching installed? Are these assets in Active Directory? And are they being properly monitored and covered from a cybersecurity perspective? Having that in place certainly does speed up the process of making sure there's proper coverage across the acquired and the acquiring organization, and that there isn't too much drift. So it always comes down to, an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure. So making sure that you have that, we called it an M&A kit, an M&A go kit, ready to go. So, hey, I have these installers ready to rock. I have a heavy forwarder that's ready to go. I have this IoT security that's ready to get dropped in place. Having that ready to go, really using security to enable business as opposed to hinder business, typically wins out in the long run and results in much better, M&A, and it kind of speeds up that process.
That sounds like an excellent recommendation to me. Well, Randy, great to have you join us today. Where can folks find out more about Critical Start?
Yeah, we're on all the socials. So follow us on Twitter, look us up on LinkedIn, and of course, criticalstart.com.
Great. Thanks for being with us, Randy. Randy Watkins, CTO with Critical Start. Hope we'll come back again soon.
Thanks, Mitch.
You bet.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're talking with the CTO for OutSystems, who goes by the moniker PJ, somewhat famous in low-code circles, as they say. And we're going to be talking about developer productivity, low-code, and what's changing out there. PJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
Developer productivity has been an issue for as long as most people can remember. So what's making it a more pressing issue today, and why are we talking about it more now than even 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. One is software itself has become the key differentiator for businesses today. So it's every company in the world can be a software development company. And so now that being a differentiator, it's very important for all these companies to have good software development practices. Software development itself has become more and more complex. So there's a significant amount of necessary complexity. There's also quite a bit of unnecessary complexity. So if you think about the tech stacks available today to a modern software developer, it's amazing. You get the front end development and all the different options you have there, Angular, all the native mobile as far as frameworks, hybrid, whatever it is, backend, Kubernetes, containers, orchestration. It's amazing, but the complexity is just daunting. And so developers are challenged with all this complexity. Companies have this ability to differentiate with software development. So it is more and more important for developers to be productive and for companies to take advantage of it and for people to get better at doing the craft of software development.
What's your sense of how much time the developers actually spend writing code, aka for business logic, versus managing all that complexity?
I think that, there's been traditional as far as views of how much time a developer actually spends. Let me pull it out from writing code. I'll just say the creative aspect. Let's talk about the innovation and creative aspect. It's probably about a third of the time of their time spent. And so there's significant amount of complexity up front. So just think of the cognitive load of choosing all that technology, choosing the right technology, and choosing a technology that a group of people can actually, with a group of people being the software development team, can all benefit from. You get it in place, you actually put that in, and eventually it goes into production, then you got to start maintaining it. And so all those aspects of maintenance, the toil that's called as far as that work and maintenance and everything related to it, choosing the right one, making a wrong decision, having to correct that decision, go back and fix that. It's probably less than a third, I'd say, where developers truly spend time on that aspect, that creative aspect that most developers get in the game for. There's a joy to that, right? It's a craft. You go into it. It's about 31 million or so professional developers in the world. I've started as far as down that path. It was fun, when you first get into it. And then after a while, you get into some of the less fun part of it and you start questioning, why are we doing the things we're doing? So I think it's probably much less than a third of your time as a developer spent on the good, creative, innovative aspects of it.
Do you think that professional developers might be their own worst enemy sometimes because they tend to favor the procedural code, the lower level language that they have in place, and they're not considering an alternative approach that would allow them to build an application? And a lot of times, some applications are amazingly creative, but others are just kind of fairly routine, right?
It is, yeah. And even the creative, I don't like to think of the slice about creative and non-creative as far as software. It's more of what's applicable for the piece of software, and so take a life support system that's written in software. Obviously, there's some extremely critical components there that we want to keep people alive, but there's other, like a system that records as far as recommendations. It's important, but you're probably not going to die, if you get some of the recommendations wrong. I think developers can be their worst enemies. I think the expectations of the industry itself is causing some of the bad behavior. And being a developer in the past, where I know I went down the path of too much technology for technology's sake. I did cause my own problems, and I think that it's a combination of the unnecessary complexity that developers ingest into the process itself, but then the unreasonable expectations of the industry of just, having to keep up, which I think is where low code and I was not the biggest fan of that moniker, but I think it definitely represents the aspect of less unnecessary complexity into that process, and developers will benefit from it.
Some form of higher level of abstraction results in less complexity and results in more code being driven. We've also spent a significant amount of time investing in DevOps workflows over the years. The goal primarily is to accelerate application development and deployment. But I wonder if the DevOps process itself becomes something of a bottleneck, and how does low code and DevOps kind of come together in a way that alleviates that issue?
Yeah, DevOps to me is a solution to a problem we should not have. It definitely has moved us much further along in traditional development. We shouldn't need it. I mean, if you think about from a developer wants to write an application that many end users starts benefiting from right away. DevOps is this thing in between that you have to do from the creative aspect of writing that software to somebody benefiting from it. And I mean, it's while it has solved many problems, those problems shouldn't even exist today. I mean, and that's one of the things that the low code as far as space or application development platform space really starts to tackle is let's get DevOps as a service, if you think of it that way, or it's just DevOps as a capability out of the requirements of a developer and just let the platform take care of it. And so as a developer, I can focus on that creative aspect. I can focus on the end user experience, and I can get it in the hands of those users without all of this unnecessary complexity there. And so there's complexity all throughout the process, as kind of talked about. DevOps is another one. And don't get me wrong, there are some great DevOps tools out there. The DevOps tool chain today is amazing. But once again, we should not have to piece all that together as a developer. We shouldn't have to do it. We should be able to just write applications and get it in the hands of end users and then iterate over it. Because I think the biggest aspect of this process is change. We all know that it is such a complex undertaking to create applications. You don't know what the application is until you get it in the hands of users, and then you really know what it shouldn't be. And then they tell you, okay, hey, we need to fix this, add this, remove this. We go back and do it over and over and over again. And that aspect of change, where modern low code platforms can capture that and really almost make DevOps, as a part of the service itself and not even a thing of its own. Which is, I think that's the way it should be.
We hear a lot about all things related to AI these days, and we see tools that are enabling developers to, at the very least, code less because we're coding ahead in the same way that spell checkers work in some regards. But will AI get smarter, and just how much code will have to be written by humans as we go along?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it'll continue. I mean, there's been some amazing breakthroughs in the AI space. I think we're probably targeting at some of the wrong areas on AI. If you look at some of the capabilities are targeted at the actual coding aspect of it and taking code and actually enhancing the handwritten code, if you want to think of it, which is good. I mean, it's beneficial. But if you think about it, the core challenges here, it's a talent shortage and it's a time shortage. So the talent shortage, 31 million developers out there today. We need more developers, 7 billion plus as far as smart devices. There's not enough developers to create applications for all these devices. So we need more people to do it. AI can fill that gap by removing or reducing the amount of skills necessary. So for these low code platforms, whatever you want to call them, the ability for AI to actually help people develop software. In that case, they're basically their development is not a career for them, right? If you think of, maybe use the term citizen developer. So it is a means to an end. The end is getting an application in the hands of an end user. So that talent shortage, we need more than 31 million people doing it. AI can help that. So basically it can make a person who doesn't think of themselves as a career developer able to actually develop. So you're accessible. The other side is a time shortage. So developers and those of us who have spent time being a traditional developer know that the 40-hour work week is a myth. You're working hours after hours after hours on deadlines for highly complex software projects, and AI can help actually shorten that amount of time. So I really think the key issue comes in these two camps of people. One is a career developer who gets time back with AI and other things, not just AI. And then people that we kind of lump into this group of citizen developers where we make development activities accessible to them, and they can also write development, but maybe not for their career, maybe just for a project, maybe for a weekend, maybe for a couple of days a week. It's whatever they want to choose, but not for their full career.
How do you think the relationship between citizen developers and professional developers, and for that matter, DevOps teams, is going to play out going forward? Everybody still needs the same guidelines, right?
They do, and it's interesting. Today, we create this kind of wall between them, if you want to think of it, right? It's like, I mean, even just the names, right? Oh, okay, this is a professional developer, a career developer, and this is a citizen developer. So they're like two different things. And I think once again, it comes down to whether you derive mastery and you like that aspect of development, which is good. I mean, I enjoy that as well as a creative aspect, or it's a means to an end. And I think we have to create systems and processes and tools where these people can work together. And you can create software with people that may be hardcore developers that work 40 hours or more a week, and then people that drop in and out, on a short-term basis. Gartner calls these fusion teams, and I'm a believer in that approach. We need to create this process where high code, low code, no code, whatever you want to call it, as far as people can get together. The output is an application, and the outcome is people can do with that application more. There's an experience on these smart devices where it benefits, whether it's a business process, it's personal, whatever it is, right? And that's the outcome that we want. And we need to have more and more people that can actually partake in that process. It's going to make it better. I mean, think about the constraint of innovation with just 31 million people, with billions of people using it. I mean, that in of itself is a problem. We have too few people that actually generate that experience of applications. Many more people consuming it, just from a societal standpoint, we need to increase that number. So yeah, absolutely. I think we got to break down these walls between people, be able to create teams where high code, low code, no code can all work together.
One of the criticisms of low code, which I'm sure you've heard, is that it results in a lot of citizen developers building applications that are kind of ugly, they don't scale, and they're even less secure than the ones created by professional developers who by no means are security experts. So, I mean, this all starts to sound too much like a good thing. So how do we get from, that arguably biased perception to where we want to be?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, look, I know you're in this cybersecurity space. Most developers don't know the difference between SIM and SOAR tools, right? And they don't want to, and they don't need to, and we don't want them to. And so whether it's a traditional developer that uses what I like to call high code, whether it's low code, security, availability, performance. I mean, I'll kind of expand it beyond just security. All the NFRs, right? Non-functional requirements, if you want to think of it, cost, and even the dirty word compliance, right? These things are all important to developers, no matter what area you're in. Low code has had I'll be frank, I mean, in the past in this industry, we've created applications that didn't fit the bill for that area. Whether, the tools basically claim to fit the bill or not, just kind of put that aside. But there's, the classic spreadsheet replacement, right? It's probably not going to be the most highly secure, highly compliant as far as application out there. But fast forward to today, that's not the case. I mean, there are many low-code platforms such as OutSystems, which obviously I like, creates very performant, very secure, very compliant as far as applications in a low-code way. So I think you've seen the baby steps, like in a lot of industries. You didn't, say go back 10, 12 years ago, we didn't create those applications that basically scale today. But today, that's very, very different. I mean, you can create a full cloud native. I mean, you basically take a developer and turn a low-code developer into a full stack cloud native developer, which could take years and years and years of experience in traditional development to do. And because a lot of this undifferentiated heavy lifting behind the scenes is done by the platform, where if you do it wrong, you obviously have a big screw up. If you let the platform do it and handle it, you can go on and focus on the creative aspect of software development using low code. So I don't think that's the case anymore. I think these platforms today actually do a great job of the security, compliance, and all the other aspects of NFRs.
So PJ, what's your best advice to folks? Do I just throw everybody in a room and lock the door and hope that something good comes out? Or is there some intelligent way of going after all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I like to look at it as what's the biggest pain, for companies. And look, I mean, there's a lot of professional developers today, just take the term low code. They don't want to get on that because it in their minds, it like devalues what they do. And it doesn't, it's basically look at it from a business standpoint of what's the biggest benefit you can give to the business. Look at it from a developer standpoint. What are the things that maybe you don't like to do and you're not good at? And so, build those fusion teams today. You can do this today. Take a developer that is a great front-end developer that maybe doesn't really know how to do APIs or back-end transactional systems. Go use a low-code tool. So you could actually, our OutSystems tool is great for developing in the back end. Maybe you still want to do the front end and hook to the APIs. Do that. You can get started. I mean, I think break down that mental barrier of low code from a professional developer standpoint is something that replaces you. It doesn't. It basically gives you time back. I mean, that's what it does, and I think that's where developers just have to try it. It's just like many of the other DevOps tools, right? Kind of had some of that up front as well. Developers had to get in and try it. And then they were like, okay, this is, ops is an okay thing for a developer, right? You can get involved. It's not a bad thing. And I think low code is very much along that same line. Just get in and try it. And you'll be amazed as far as the capabilities of these platforms, that what type of software that can actually get produced.
All right, folks. Well, you heard it here, and also as the older you get, the less time you have to spare. So time to rethink what your approach is. PJ, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Syed Hamid, who is the CEO for Sophie. They just raised $7.75 million for a no-code testing platform, and we're going to jump into what that means. Syed, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Michael.
There is no shortage of testing tools out there. Maybe a shortage of people using them correctly, but there's plenty of platforms out there. So what exactly does a no-code tool do for people versus the types of tools we've seen historically?
Yeah, I think if you look at, before I go into that specific one, if you look at the problem, all the 29 million worldwide developers are having, it's actually, they have to constantly not only write the code to run the automation, but also constantly running it and maintaining it on a regular basis. People spend up to 30% of their time just testing it. So when we set out to build the no-code test automation platform, we start thinking about not just the automation, but also the experience, meaning when you are testing it, you need to get an environment, you need to create automation, you need to maintain the automation, and more importantly, find issues like visual quality, performance, and like UI, UX, and accessibility issues. So that's why we are the no-code platform automation that makes the holistic view of the QA experience instead of just focusing on the no-code itself. And that's really what differentiates us from us. As an example, people spend 30 minutes to an hour just configuring test environment. You can do it in the 10 seconds in our platform. You have to use so many different specialized tools to get visual quality, performance, and other aspects of the testing. We get you out of the box. That's why we call it the no-code test automation platform that gives you all those aspects of your testing right out of the box.
So what's the plan for the funding? What work needs to be done still?
So during the pandemic, we saw a significant increase. We grew 4x last year. We are expected to grow 4x this year and next year as well. So our investment is actually scaling the whole business. We are less than 30 employees, expected to grow more than double while everybody is freezing and laying off people. Actually, we believe it's a great opportunity to really disrupt the QA test market and then our overall dev productivity market.
Do you think the tests themselves are going to be done more by the developers, or will there still be a testing team that will evaluate the software itself? Because I don't know, sometimes, if I test myself, I'm always going to pass, right?
Right. Excellent question. I get this question all the time. What's the future of this almost 6 million QA engineers worldwide? So it really varies on the team's maturity and the agility aspects of it. For example, some of our customers who are less than 50 employees, actually, they don't have a QA dedicated team. They want everything to be done. But as the maturity of the product increases, or if they are in the market for a few years, they have to validate more so. As an example, if you are releasing your application in 10 countries, right? You can write a one line of code change that can impact your millions of customer base. So as you go into the maturity of your application and the space or the market that you're releasing it to, that actually fundamentally decide how you test it. And some teams actually have dedicated teams and are using our platform, and some people are using as the developers to do it. But how I see it in the next 5 years, that it will shift more and more towards the DevOps, meaning developers should be unable to go and do testing right when the code is changed rather than after the fact. And that's what we see. So to answer your question, it will be more towards the dev than the dedicated test teams.
How do I integrate your platform with DevOps workflows? I mean, are there CLIs, APIs? How does that all come about?
Yeah, so we have kind of 3 key capabilities that we tell people that, hey, you could try out today. Anybody in the world can come to Sophie.ai and sign up. It's a product-led growth. We believe the developers need to feel it, be productive before we do anything. So they can come to the Sophie, sign up, and within few minutes, they can actually automate their core scenarios. And we, out of the box, provide CI/CD integration with pretty much all the DevOps tools that you can integrate. So within few hours, you can automate your top scenarios and integrate as part of your daily builds.
Do you think we're going to see a convergence of all these capabilities of different platforms people have been using to test different things? Is all that starting to become a feature of a larger platform in the cloud versus me having to maintain this rather complex testing environment?
Actually, I do believe that. And that's exactly why we built it. So if you look at it today, if you are an engineering manager or a VP of engineering, and you have Android team and an iOS team, as an example, or web team, you literally have more than 10 to 15 different tools that you're dealing with on a daily basis, right? From Android to Appium to Xcode to like your own device farm, right? So you're totally right that, people have so much tools that they have to use. And if you have find issues like performance and visual quality of your application, you have, again, specialized tools. And that's what exactly we're trying to address, is to bring all these, on an average, 10 to different tools into a one seamless, beautiful experience of Sophie.
Do you think AI will play a larger role in testing, and what might that look like? Because some people are a little skeptical. So what is the state of AI in testing these days?
So if you look at it, before I talk about the solution, there are 3 key problems that people are having in the QA space. Number one is that when a product change comes in, ability to identify what's impacted. Number 2 is that how do I run the relevant test cases at scale, right, on different platforms? And the third is that if any minor product change happens, my maintenance increases, because if I change an icon from here to this point, it fails. So the identification, running, and maintainability, these are the 3 aspects that are right now more than the AI. It's the machine learning that's impacting us, and we are actually using it as well. And how we are using it, we actually use this to identify where the patterns are, identify for a given product change where the impacted code base is, or impacted functional test or your performance test, runs that automatically, and then run it at a scale on n number of devices, depending on the change you have made. And the third is that when you run the test, if you ask any QA engineers, you'll find they find a lot of false positives. So that's where the machine learning and AI comes into the picture, that where we can identify, hey, where are the failure or false positives, so you can actually identify and run it, or you can use the other aspect of the application to run the product. In our cases, where we are using specifically it's 2 cases. When we are creating the no-code automation, product changes all the time. If you're running on a Samsung S7 versus a tablet, right, the form factors are changed. So this whole behavior changes, and that's where we use to kind of determine where the next test should be run and how we should run it. So I definitely see in the next 3-5 years that will come into more and more play.
There's a lot of folks who are talking about security and security testing. Do you think that that becomes part of the QA testing process eventually? I mean, it is part of the quality experience at the end of the day.
Yeah. So there are again two types of testing that people usually perform, right? One is that static analysis, right? You have like companies who are performing a static analysis, saying, hey, if there are any vulnerability, right? Which is actually most of the people actually do it as part of the QA processes. The problem that you'll come is that when you're doing the runtime analysis or runtime testing or a penetration testing, which is very specialized one, right? So I see that the penetration testing has always been a part of test, but there are companies who are performing that security test. Eventually, I see is that element will be coming into the testing, and people are actually building tools to bring that more on the static analysis and identification of it, not around the penetration testing as much.
So what is the one thing when it comes to testing that you see organizations doing over and over again that just makes you shake your head and go, when are we going to figure this out?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. They actually, every single VP of engineering that I talk to, they said, man, why do I need to spend the same test manual and takes 2-3 times through 2-3 days to release that? I mean, every single said, look, the days, even in 80s and 90s, people were doing majority of manual testing. And even today, you'll find people in the companies who are actually spending days, 3, 4, 5 days of manual testing, running on N number of devices and give the results back. So people say that, look, yeah, there are challenges, there are stack changing, but look, we needed a simpler, easier solution to go do that. And the reason people cannot do that is primarily one reason. It's too complex. And it requires engineering skills. If I ask a QA engineer or an engineering manager to create a really great automation for your suite, they have to dedicate a full-time engineering resource to do that. And they are very short on resources. As you know, the engineering talent is very difficult to hire. And that's where the problem has been, that constant manual test and the complexity of just so many tools to go and create an automation and run it on a regular basis.
There's a lot of end users that will access a piece of software and wonder who, if anybody, ever tested this thing at all. We have a lot of digital business transformation projects that are occurring with a certain amount of, shall we say, uneven success.
Yeah.
Is it just that the people building software don't think like everybody else, or is there something fundamentally flawed in the way we think about testing in the first place?
The problem is actually at the end of the day, time, resources, and money, right? It's the time that really every single team, especially if we saw it in COVID, that people had to transform in like years of work in months, right? So people took the risk and they said, look, we are going to just get out there and use A/B testing or testing in production to kind of validate it and turn around fast. So there is a philosophy of some engineering team. I said, look, release things fast and release it at a smaller subset of your production server, learn from it, and turn around fast. Instead of spending days and months or weeks trying to test it, everything, and then release it. So that's a fundamental shift. And people are actually became easy adapting to it. Said, look, we are going to release in production and we will find issues and we'll turn around fast, which I think is a fundamental issue, because, not all industries are same. You can deal with certain things if you're not using with like a low business impact data, but you can't do that with our HBI or an MBI data set.
All right. Well, I think that end users are starting to figure out that developers have been experimenting on them and calling it agile programming, and they're not all that happy about it. Syed, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had a great slate of interviews with amazing industry experts to give you the latest and greatest in the tech world. We'll be back again tomorrow, so we hope to see you then. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.